no personal knowledge whatsoever of their relationship at all. Everything he would say would be based on the hearsay of Mark Redwine. We think it's cumulative. I think it's something that is attempting to play on the sympathies and prejudices of the jury, and it's not probative, so we'd object under 401, 402, 403.
All right, we've already held a hearing on it, and you're still overruled.
Thank you.
Was there anything else? Okay.
Endorsed and properly subpoenaed defense witness James Samino is an on-call force firefighter commander. And we were informed yesterday, to our surprise, he has been dispatched to Montana to assist in command of fighting a forest fire up in Montana. We've been diligent in reaching out to him and communicating with him regarding his subpoena. Nonetheless, he's in Montana. He informed our team last night that he can be available to testify by WebEx either tomorrow morning or after 3 today. I don't think after 3 today would work, given short notice. The court's inclined to let us call him and have him testify remotely. So I wanted to ask the court if he could testify by WebEx Wednesday morning. I'm not entirely comfortable asking for a show cause hearing for someone who's from the area, who's going up to Montana to fight fires.
Well, we can make 3 o'clock work today. I don't know if anybody else can. I would rather do it today if we can. If we can't, that's fine. I mean, I don't know where you're going to be evidence-wise.
Okay.
So we'll have to take a break then. How long is he going to take? It shouldn't be that long, should it?
I think from our perspective, direct is 10 to 15 minutes on the outside.
All right.
That's going to be a lot of prep and a little bit of that.
All right.
Judge, I have no objection, of course. I think that's reasonable. We would prefer 3 o'clock today, too, just in case the case wraps up today.
That's what I'm thinking. I mean, I don't know that it will, but it would be nice. So I think, Becca, you heard that? So we'll take a break right before that. That'll be our break in the afternoon.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for accommodating.
Yeah, no problem. So with that, are we ready to start after I'm ready? Yes, sir. Right. You can see the jury comes up. They said that was perfect. They're still in there? Okay. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's been normal. No. Yeah. All rise for the jury, please. Great, we can be seated. Next defense witness.
Mr. Richard Eichenboom.
Mr. Eichenboom, come on up to the witness stand, please. And raise your right hand before you sit down. Do you solemnly swear or affirm an penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Have a seat. Go ahead, Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Eichenboom, will you please state your first name and spell your last name for the record?
It's Richard Eichenboom, E-I-K-E-L-E-N from Nico, B-O-O-M from Maria, Eichenboom.
What kind of name is that?
It's a Dutch name.
And sir, is that where you're from?
Yes, I'm originally from the Netherlands.
And how long have you been in the States?
We lived in the United States for since 2011.
And where are you currently living?
Yeah, we're in the process of moving, so we have a house in Conifer and Santa Fe.
And what do you do for employment?
I'm a forensic scientist.
I'm going to ask the court to qualify you as an expert in a couple of things in a few minutes. Those things will be crime scene investigation, evidence collection, and interpretation of the evidence in crime scene. So to get there, I need to go through your educational background and your work history.
Yes.
So if we could start, my understanding is that you began relevant schooling or schooling relevant to crime scene investigation, evidence collection, and interpretation of evidence in crime scenes somewhere in the neighborhood of 1983. Have I read your...
Yeah. In 1983, I started education for a laboratory school, we call it in Holland. And I did analytical chemistry, and it qualifies you to do all kinds of analytical chemistry work on the laboratory.
After technical school for laboratory education, were you in the military?
Yes.
And what country's military?
Yes, we got drafted in the Netherlands at that time for the Netherlands, and then of course for NATO.
And were you in a Green Beret? Were you in Special Forces?
Yeah, we were long distance reconnaissance behind enemy lines in Green Berets.
After Special Forces military service, did you go to university?
Yes, I started working, and during the evening hours, I started in Rotterdam University degree in biochemistry.
After your work in biochemistry, would that be equivalent to what we call a bachelor's degree or Bachelor of Science in the States?
Yeah, of course, difficult to translate, but something between bachelor and master's degree.
How long did you go to school for?
That took in total 7 years, I think.
And was it, how long would that program take to complete if you weren't also working?
You can do it if you do it on day schooling, like in 4 years.
And then did you have any follow-up after university?
Well, I started working for the Netherlands Forensic Institute. That's the institute which investigates all the homicide cases and all kinds of criminal cases in the Netherlands. And of course, we got a lot of indoor training. There's not a lot of training outside there, especially in that time in forensics. And then all kinds of extra training for blood and pattern analysis, crime scene reconstruction, DNA.
Was that in approximately 1989?
What you're talking about now?
Well, the work you started after university. Where did you? Is it something Centicor?
Oh, yeah, but that's just in '92, I think, or something.
Will you go through? And I can provide you your CV to refresh your recollection. I know that there's a lot on there.
Yeah.
But starting with relevant experience after school and moving forward to your starting the business in independent forensic services.
Yeah, that's a lot. I started working on the Netherlands Forensic Institute, and that was on the Department of Serology, and that's before the big boom of DNA. So the serology department changed later in the biology department, and that's where we do investigation of DNA. And I work on sub-department of that biology department, and I was in trace recovery. So I found all kinds of evidence on pieces of clothing and items, and that was put forward for DNA. And of course, by doing so, I had to do a lot of blood-stained clothing. We had a lot of homicides. We used knives in Holland a lot, baseball bats. So I got interested in blood and pattern analysis and blood stain interpretation. At one point after '94, we were very secure about the source of DNA, about the source of the blood. But then you want to know, okay, how did it get there? What does it mean that you find this? And so I think that's 1998. Then we started doing the first courses, introductory courses in blood and pattern analysis, and those were given by United Kingdom experts from their national lab, Forensic Science Service. And at that time, our lab decided that we wanted to do more with it so that we could do more interpretation also for the courts. And in that time, I got the appointment that I had to look all over the world for experts and expertise about blood and pattern analysis and make it something which we could introduce in the Dutch courts in the Netherlands. And in doing so, I did basic courses in the United States, in Canada. And then later on, we found what we thought was the best match. An understudy program in Ontario, and that's a program where you get trained with a mentor. So during training phase, you get an blood stain pattern analyst expert assigned to you, and he will first you work with him. So you go to crime scenes with your expert, with your mentor. Then you work together on crime scenes, and you both work on it. And then later on in the third stage, you do the crime scenes, and your mentor is there to watch you perform your analysis and the reports. And after that, it's finished with a mock court and then a trial, and you get a certificate.
What year approximately was that process when you were working with a mentor?
I think it was 2002.
Mr. Eichenblum, let me interrupt you because I couldn't understand part of what you said. So the whole part with the mentor, was that blood splatter analysis? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's blood and pattern analysis.
Okay, thank you.
This will be requiring you to back up a little bit, but did you ever receive a university certification for trace evidence recovery?
Yeah, as part of the training and also blood and pattern analysis, I did all kinds of training, but I don't have the dates, so I need my CV for that. I really don't know when I exactly did all those things. But yeah, that was in Canada as well, I think, Ottawa.
Yes.
Mr. Eichenblum, what was the university where you received the trace evidence recovery certification?
That the Summer Institute of Forensic Sciences in Ottawa?
Was there also one from Carleton University?
Yeah. I don't know where I have that one. Yeah.
So have you kept up with developments in trace evidence recovery?
Yes.
Will you tell the jury what forensic bloodstain pattern analysis is?
Yeah. So bloodstain pattern analysis is the investigation of the size, shape, location, distribution of bloodstains at scenes of crime or at clothing. And you want to know what caused them, so what gave rise to their origin, were these caused. And that, of course, can give you a lot of information about, handlings and violence or things happened on the crime scene. For instance, at what altitude a blow was struck, or was the victim lying on the ground when he was struck, or standing up. Transfer patterns, for instance, can give you information about a murder weapon. If you have a transfer which looks like a shoe, then somebody maybe walked with a shoe, or a hand, or a knife. That can be very useful. So the bloodstain pattern analysis can help you deduce a lot of information about crime.
Is it a fair understanding that in the Netherlands, gunshot or firearm crime is less common, and you dealt more with blunt force trauma type injuries and knife wounds, that kind of stuff?
Yes, in the Netherlands, guns are outlawed, so it's very difficult to get a gun license in the Netherlands. So we get much more homicides with knives and blunt force objects, and therefore at the National Lab, that's the majority of cases. And then, the shooting cases, which we all, of course, also have, is more mafia-related or gang-related.
In the Netherlands, does the justice system have a different look to it? It's not adversarial, as I understand it. It's more of a team. I'll have you explain it.
Yes. Yeah, we have an inquisitorial system. That means that we don't have a jury. In our system, and a lot of other European countries, we have 3 professional judges who decide on criminal cases. It's a major case. So that means rape, homicide, basically. And in the Netherlands, you actually always work for the court. So you cannot, it's almost impossible to work just for the defense. They don't have any money or income. So we have an investigative judge. As soon as there's a suspect, the investigative judge gives the orders to the experts to do the investigation, and you report to the courts. So, that's quite a difference from the situation in the United States.
Have you received certification in bloodstain pattern analysis, and was that something you used in your role working for the court?
Yes. In order to get it introduced, I had to do all the training, and I also have to explain the courts. So I did do a lot of training to judges and prosecution and district attorneys. And after I finished the mentorship and all the training in the United States and in Canada, I started writing reports for the courts.
Was some of that through an organization called the Netherlands Forensic Institute?
Yeah, at that time I still was working for the Netherlands Forensic Institute.
And it's through that agency that you did work that was presented to courts?
Yes.
Did you, I believe this is 2002, so if that helps you orient, if you need to refresh your recollection, but did you do an understudy program with the Ontario Provincial Police?
Yes, I did.
And what was that related to?
I just explained the understudy program was the program which I talked about with the mentor. So you get assigned an expert who's a qualified bloodstain pattern analyst, And you walk along with him first, and you go to court, and then you go over all his cases. Then you work together, and later on you work alone, and he will review all your cases.
Did you study the math and physics as it pertains to bloodstain pattern analysis with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police?
Yeah, that was part of the understudy. You needed to do that. Math and physics is a very important part of bloodstain pattern analysis, and it's the more scientific part of it. You want to know how, especially projected bloodstains are created, and you can do all kinds of calculations on the angle impact, for instance. And that's the way we can determine how an area of origin or an area of convergence could have been caused.
Do you recall the work or the study that you did at the Institute for Criminalistics and Criminal Investigation Sciences in the Netherlands, Zutphen?
Oh, Zutphen, yeah. Yes, that's actually the Dutch Police Academy. And our CSI officers are trained there, and I gave a lot of training there as well.
You both received and provided training at that institute?
Yes, we had at one point, but I was already qualified, and so it was more to keep track on them. We had, I think it was Herbert McDonnell come over there, did the training in bloodstain pattern analysis for crime scene officers. And I had joined that as well.
Have you received advanced bloodstain pattern analysis from the Miami-Dade Police Department Training Bureau?
Yes, I did.
Is that similar to a police academy type of thing?
Yeah, I think it was really, it was connected to their state lab. So, yeah, I would say that's similar. That I think a lot of police officers use that as their training.
How about bloodstain pattern recognition study through the Canadian Police?
Yeah, so yeah, those are trainings, part of the training of the understudy program, or you can do it separately, but they also use it for their own police officers to, if you have a basic course, then it's just, as I said, then you're not an expert to qualify for testing in court, but it's very useful for police officers to know something about bloodstain pattern analysis and stain selection, for instance, for DNA sampling.
With the Netherlands Forensic Institute, did you gain practical experience or real-world experience doing crime scene investigations?
Yes. When I was working on the Netherlands Forensic Institute, I started out at the serology and then later on trace recovery unit. I was the head of the trace recovery. But we also soon found out that, especially with the coming up of DNA testing, that there was a lack of expertise for taking those samples. So I started a project where we brought a multidisciplinary team of experts from the national lab to the crime scene. And those were more complex crime scenes, of course. And that could be bloodstains, could be luminol investigations, but also hairs, fibers, fingerprints, gunshot residue, depending on the type of case. And when the police call us with these complex cases, then we would go with a multidisciplinary team to the crime scenes.
So you have obviously done crime scenes. Can you estimate how many tons?
Hundreds.
Have you participated in evidence collection and the interpretation of evidence at those crime scenes? I think that was borne out by your last answer, but
yes. So yeah, that had to go to court, of course, at one point. So yeah, we had to testify about that every now and then. I have to address that in the Dutch system, you don't go to court that easily. It's only for high-profile cases, and we call an average homicide. There's a lot of DNA scientists now in the Netherlands who never been to court because it's just not important enough. The judges are used to work from reports and not having the experts in the courts.
But you're one of the experts who has participated at court?
Yes, a lot.
Have you gained knowledge in the use of something called luminol?
Yes, actually, that was the thesis of my end project for the University of Rotterdam. And I investigated luminol and the damage it could do on DNA, because that was one of the worries. Luminol, you probably heard of it already, is very useful in detecting blood. The problem is that you get a lot of false positives. And the other problem at the time was that you wouldn't know how much damage it would do on the DNA. And of course, it would be easy, as you see on television, to use this all the time. But there are some downsides of luminol, especially if you see that you spray your fluid on all your evidence. That's not something you should think lightly of. You should do, and that's the one of the conclusions of my thesis as well, is that it's a last resort. It's not a thing that, okay, I don't want to do this investigation or take too much time to start luminol and see if we find something. You always do a thorough investigation and then luminol. So for my thesis, I investigated luminol. I changed the solution. So I made a new solution where we think DNA damage was limited. And then later on, we also made a solution which was usable after everything was done, and we could make it more visible with a stronger solution, which would do more damage to your crime scene. But it would be more easy to photograph that luminescence or the light which is caused by the luminol.
This happens every time I bring up luminol with you. You know a lot about it. Did you participate in something called the Luminol Project?
Yes. I started the Luminol Project in the Netherlands, and that's why I had to investigate it. And I asked, and I did get to do this at the University of Rotterdam to make it my end thesis.
Okay. When you say that it was the dissertation or thesis?
Yeah. I don't know how you translate it.
In the States, that's something that people who are getting master's degrees do.
Yeah.
Is your education to the level of master's degrees? Is that the equivalent?
Yeah, some translators would translate it.
Hold on a second. Sorry.
He already answered this. He said his education's in between a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. So this is asked and answered.
I'll move on.
Okay.
In the Netherlands, did you gain experience, real-world experience doing typing of blood group and protein markers?
Yes. This is the blood group typing. You all know ABO system where you have either you're O positive or A or B. So at the time when I started the national lab, we didn't do the DNA testing yet. We were investigating that as something for the future. So that started in 1994. But I was at the lab before that, so I started this protein markers and the ABO typing system to identify larger blood stains. You need quite a lot of blood to do this type of typing, because then you take a piece of stain and you dissolve this, and then you can try to find out the blood group.
And were you involved in the coordination of complex and high-profile cases, as in when a crime scene investigation was being conducted? Were you responsible for dividing tasks?
Yes, as I said, I was the project leader for several projects. Luminol was one of them, actually sub-project of the crime scene investigation. But the project was wider. It actually started out more with complex homicides on prostitutes. I wrote a project for that because we didn't solve those cases. And these women were found naked outside. And then I said, okay, we have to find DNA evidence on these bodies. And of course, if they're lying in the water, that was very difficult. So we started a project with going to crime scenes and take samples on the crime scene or even in the water if that was necessary. So from that on, the project was born to make it a multidisciplinary team where we could go to crime scenes and do investigations on the crime scene itself, all biological investigations, but also hairs, fibers, anything we need. We would also do fingerprints on the bodies, for instance, at the time.
So it sounds like trace recovery on bodies. That's something you did.
Yes.
And did you have any part in a cold case project?
Yes, of course. We were quite successful. We solved a couple of cases which were deemed unsolvable, where the body which was lying in the water for like 3 weeks. Normally they would say, well, we don't even touch it, we don't investigate it. We did. And actually it was one of the first hits in the database. And from that on, they also started thinking, yeah, of course, this new DNA technique is very useful in cases which were not solved. So I was a project leader in cold cases for the national lab. So I was not a project leader from the police. The police started these projects and had their police leaders leading these projects, but they came to me, and from the national lab, I was the leader of these cold cases. So I would decide which we would need in the teams, like the hairs, fibers, fingerprints, and then I was the contact person for these cold cases.
I know that. Well, do you have a business called Independent Forensic Services?
Yes, in 2005, I joined the business started by my wife.
I know that your business does a lot of different sorts of crime scene and forensic work. I kind of, for the sake of time, want to sort of narrow it to what I think is going to be relevant to your testimony today. So with court permission, may I ask a leading question?
Go ahead.
Does Independent Forensic Services, your lab, do bloodstain pattern analysis, crime scene investigations, crime scene reconstruction?
Yes.
Also, there's a lot of DNA work done by this laboratory, but I'm not going to inquire after that with you, but that's accurate.
Yes.
So with a more open-ended question, you go through lots of DNA stuff as well.
Yes.
And I've got a lot on your continuing education for the sake of keeping everyone's attention. I won't go through all of this at this point. But another thing, in your experience, in your training, have you become or developed any expertise in photography?
Yes, of course, during bloodstain pattern analysis and on the police academy, photography of crime scenes is very important. So yeah, you get specialized training about that.
So you have familiarity with crime scene picture taking?
Yes.
And have you done it at crime scenes?
Yes.
So you've been trained in it, you've got continuing education in it, and you've done it?
Yes.
Are you familiar with something called touch DNA?
Yes.
What is it?
Section of relevance, Judge. This isn't anything that's in his report, and I think at this point, if Mr. Moran is asking to endorse him for the original purposes that he stated, I wouldn't have an objection, but I do want to make sure that we're setting the proper parameters on that. So I'm not aware of any DNA testimony from this witness.
We weren't, you mentioned that it wouldn't be any DNA.
Your Honor, I'm not. It's just that touch DNA is a trace forensic technique, but I'm not meaning to elicit testimony on it. I just was using that to demonstrate
Then we don't need to do it. And there is a stipulation as to expertise. Are you willing to accept that, or you want to go any further?
No, that's great. That's
okay. I will. And you're also seeking to endorse him in bloodstain or blood splatter analysis too, this subsection of.
Yes, Your Honor. So what we would seek to have him qualified in is crime scene investigation, evidence collection, interpretation of evidence in crime scenes, especially bloodstain pattern analysis.
And you're okay with all that, Mr. Johnson?
Yes, the only one that I want to be clear on is crime scene investigation in general. Could I just inquire a couple questions?
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
So would you agree with me that bone and medical are not in your field of expertise?
Bone and medical. So as I said, I set up the multidisciplinary team for the national lab, and that doesn't mean that I'm an expert in all these fields. It's impossible. That's why we brought this multidisciplinary team. So I know about it, of course. I work together. I actually asked my wife to join the national lab for that. But I'm not qualified as an expert on bone.
Okay. I didn't mean for it to be a complicated question. On June 3rd of 2021, you interviewed with myself and Investigator Heidel, right? In that interview, you advised that bone and medical were not in your field of expertise.
So, no, I'm not the expertise.
Okay, thank you. Would you also agree that canines aren't in your expertise?
I've worked with them. Actually, train school was very close where we lived in the Netherlands. But I'm not the expert on dogs, no.
Thank you. And then similarly with DNA, you didn't render any opinions about DNA in this case, correct?
I didn't render the opinions, yes.
Okay. So, I'm asking you questions just to see what your endorsement's going to be. But my understanding from your report is that you reviewed some evidence in the case, you reviewed some photographs in the case, and you're going to talk about just interpretation of that. Am I right about that?
Yes, but of course, with the blood stain pattern analysis, DNA is important. You have to know the source. So in that sense, yeah.
You know, I'm not.
It's kind of.
I'm agreeing with you here. I think you're getting kind of more into cross-examination.
It's okay, Judge. I just want to be clear that he won't be endorsed as an expert in any of these other areas.
Well, not yet.
Okay.
So,
If we're clear on that, I have no objection to the endorsement as it was stated, if that's what crime scene investigator means.
thank you. And he'll be accepted as an expert in crime scene investigation, evidence collection, including trace evidence collection, interpretation of the crime scenes, which includes blood splatter analysis. So go ahead. Thank you.
Mr. Eichenblum, did you review photos the FBI took in this case?
Yes, I reviewed all the photos, which were a lot, which I received in the case.
And obviously you were not there and not invited when the FBI was taking photographs.
No, I was not in the crime scene.
And also, sorry, this is sort of obtuse, but you weren't aware that of Dylan Redwine or Mark Redwine at the time FBI was doing its work?
Aware of the case?
Well, in November of 2012, you would not have been aware or invited?
No, I didn't hear about the case. No, I didn't know.
So this is it's sort of unpleasant to ask, but it comes up with questioning of our witnesses. Was all of your training and schooling free?
No.
Does it cost you time and money to travel to Durango?
Yes.
And do you know the industry standard hourly rate for professionals with your expertise?
Yes, it's different. We are connected to some of these agencies and stuff, and then the difference, but $300 to $400 is quite normal.
Did you agree generously to work at a discounted rate in this case?
Yeah, in the state of Colorado, we work for ADC and the public defenders for just state rates.
And do you take every case that comes in the door, or are you choosy about the ones you pick?
No, we make selections.
Is it customary or proper to rely on photographs in your field?
Yes, very often the crime scene is not preserved, and of course, for good instances, the gold case teams, you don't have that anymore. So the thing you hope for is that proper photographs were taken of the crime scene in order to do analysis of photographs after that. Of course, if it's possible, then it's better, and it would be giving you a lot of insight to go to the crime scene, but very often that's not possible.
So it's important when taking crime scene photographs to make images that can be later relied upon.
Yes, that's an important part of the investigation.
In your training and experience, is it acceptable or reasonable for investigating agencies to take photographs and then later say, it's unreasonable to rely on our photos? Is that an acceptable practice?
Objection, Judge. This is argumentative.
I don't understand that question, Mr. Moran.
Let me ask it this way. Sir, when you're taking photographs, you understand other people may need to look at those and rely on them, yes?
Yes, with blood stain pattern analysis, it's very important. If you do the investigation, you know you have to give evidence about it, then you have to relay this to the court or to the jury. And of course, they should be able to make their own opinion about the evidence you collected and the evidence which was on the crime scene or on the clothing of victims. So yes, it's important to have those, have good pictures of those so that you can rely on those in the court.
When you take crime scene photographs, do you take them in a way that only you can be the interpreter of those photographs, or are they made so that other reasonable viewers can make some use of them?
I think with all forensic sciences, it's important that another expert can come make his own opinions and conclusions about work you did, and that they can verify at least what the work you did on the evidence or on the scene of crime. So in that sense, you have to take pictures that other experts can rely on, and also the court and the juries.
So some part of it is to make sure that verification is possible later.
Yes, it's verification, but also for your own recollection. Look at this case. You've seen hundreds, I think even thousands of pictures, some of them maybe double, but thousands of pictures. It's impossible to remember all of it. There's so much in there with the bones, with clothing, with the crime scenes, the car, the house. It's impossible, even for a crime scene officer who was on the crime scene, to remember all of that. You cannot, especially if you keep in mind that it's not the only case people work on. So then you have to be going back to recollect things. You have to go back to your own pictures and your own reports.
Your Honor, may I also approach with these photographs?
Yes.
And I neglected to inquire, at least with respect to 1240 through 1245, is there any objection?
So my understanding of these photographs is that 1240 through 1244 are already admitted exhibits, but I just want to confirm that with counsel.
That's correct.
So these are the
Through you?
yes, the people's exhibits. They're just compilations. I just want to make sure they're the same photographs.
They are comparisons side by side, so
And
I
then,
think so, and I suspect that they're ones that prosecution would have meant to introduce.
yes, no, just making sure they're the same. I have no objection to those. And then 1245, I think there just needs to be a little foundation on 1245, but I'm not going to object to it ultimately.
All right. So you want to lay the foundation on 1245?
I beg your pardon, Your Honor.
He's not objecting to anything but 1245, and on that, he just wants some, a little foundation.
Understood. Starting here with 1240.
All right, well, hold on. I thought you were going to admit everything at once, so
Beg your
1240,
pardon. I can do that. Beg your pardon.
that's fine.
Move to admit everything 1240 through 1244, excluding 1245. I'll lay some foundation for that when we get to it.
All right, 1240 through 44 are admitted.
Permission to publish.
Yes.
Mr. Eichelboom, are these photographs that you have seen before?
Yes.
Is your understanding that these are photographs of the front of the love seat at Mr. Redwine's house?
Yes.
And in looking at these photographs, one, can you describe for the jury sort of what's going on between the left photograph and the right photograph? Do you observe sort of any photo enhancements that's happened here?
Yeah, there are, of course, different techniques. I'm not sure if the jury is aware of the luminol treatment and the way that works. Or...
You're right. We need to start there. Thank you.
Okay.
What's the blue stuff, and why would you manipulate a photograph when you've sprayed luminol?
Yes. So luminol is used when you normally use, if you don't see blood stains on a crime scene and you want to know if, after you did a thorough investigation, if there could be blood on the scene. In order to do so, you darken the room, and then you start applying an activated luminol solution. But of course, taking pictures in the dark is very difficult because if you have a normal camera, you just see black. So you have to adjust your camera settings depending the all kinds of ways of do the photographing. So I'm not exactly sure. You have to ask the police officer who took the pictures, but it's very common to take a picture before the investigation, when the light on, then you take the light off, and then you have to take a picture during the application of luminol. Otherwise, you won't see this blue light, which is emitted in the dark. It's not that strong. So if we would apply luminol here, you probably wouldn't see it. It's very, very faint. So what we do then is we take a picture in the dark. If the luminol glows, it glows with blood, but also with all kinds of other objects or metal objects or paints. So you have to wear for false positives, and then you take a picture of those. And well, one of the things I think that I did here is that they overlay the luminescence, so the blue light, on top of the picture of the couch. And that's a very common practice. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. Do you want me to elaborate on that?
Let me ask another question. So in looking at this image, are you able, with your blood stain pattern analysis expertise, able to say whether what we're seeing here is a swipe pattern? I might get ahead of myself. I need to ask you what a swipe pattern is first, and then we can go there.
So, the swipe pattern is part of the transfer pattern. What bloody object comes in contact with another object. Swipe means that there's a movement, so what bloody object comes in contact with another object while it's moving. With luminol, we have to be very careful, and that's also, I think that's generally accepted with interpretation. Photographs are taken in the dark. Normally, you don't see them with the naked eye by daylight, so you're doing interpretation on something which is not visible with the naked eye. So that means that you have to take back a couple of steps already and say, okay, we have to be careful and we have to go up maybe a notch with the interpretation of this. So basically our conclusion in the Netherlands was, in my literature, is that with blood stain pattern analysis, luminol, which is closely related, a lot of luminol experts use, or a lot of blood stain pattern analysts use luminol. But with interpretation, you have to take great care, and basically you keep it with either the object was cleaned or not cleaned. That's something you can say something about it, because that's where it's used for. But the luminol is a fluid, so you add a fluid on top of a blood stain, and it will alter the appearance already with that. So great caution has to be taken if you want to do an interpretation with that.
So you've got to be cautious about how you interpret luminol. It's different than interpreting blood.
Yeah, with blood stain pattern analysis, normally, I don't know, give all these basic patterns, impact, cast off, transfers, and there's all kinds of definitions for those, and pictures with that, and then you can do this interpretation. But with luminol, that's much more difficult.
Are you comfortable saying whether this is a swipe or a drag pattern?
No.
If this was not luminol and it was in fact blood, you could make a determination like that.
Yeah, it would be easier if you have a real blood stain. Then of course it would be much easier to do the interpretation. Then you see the nice red color.
Is this what we're seeing here consistent with transfer?
Well, yeah, of course. In the broader sense, everything is transferred. Some objects transfer blood onto this couch, or one way it was transferred. But with the blood stain pattern analysis, you want to shed light on the mechanism which caused it, and that's the thing I don't know in this case.
One of the reasons it's important to be careful in interpreting what happens based on what you see with luminol is because luminol is so sensitive, right?
Yes. depending on the type of solutions, there's all kinds of, there's basically worldwide, I think, like 3 or 4 solutions which are used. One of them is mine. And those have all kinds of, well, not all kinds, they have a different type of reaction and sensitivity. So it's described in literature that basically with luminol, you would be able to detect dilutions of blood in the area of 1 in 100,000 as most sensitive. That's extremely sensitive.
CBI analyst Joe Clayton said that there were formulas up to 1 in a million.
Yes, I've heard that. We did a lot of experiments, and I think we touched the 1 in 100,000 once. Kind of different, it's difficult, and you have to keep in mind that this is laboratory testing. So what we're doing, we do these test tubes and we make a dilution, so 1 milliliter of blood in 9 milliliters of water, and then you dilute further from that, and then you get into millions of dilutions. But keep in mind that this is not in any way shape similar to what we see at crime scenes. Of course, nobody's using 100,000 liters of water or 20,000 gallons of water on a crime scene. That would be a swimming pool or something like that. So at the crime scene, it's more the using water and soap solutions and all kinds of other cleaning materials and then rubbing it. But you would never get to that kind of dilution, of course.
But with a 1 to 100,000 dilution rate, you could still find blood if you had used 20,000 gallons of water in the cleanup process. You'd still get a blue illumination.
Yes, and that's also. So I said that this is in laboratory testing. In crime scenes, for instance, you have to look at the object. This very smooth table. Well, there's some nerves in there, but if it was completely smooth, then you would be able to clean that completely away. But for instance, the carpet. I never seen somebody clean a carpet completely that luminol would not detect it anymore. So depending on the surface, you can even put 100,000 or 200,000 liters of water on the carpet. It will not clean it away that the luminol won't detect it. So yeah, the surface is very important.
What happens when a small amount of blood is cleaned up with bleach?
As said before, what happens with luminol is that it has a lot of false positive reactions, and actually it's false positive. Luminol just reacts with oxidized metals. And in blood we have the heme groups. Difficult thing, but everybody knows that we transport oxygen through the blood, and the molecule doing that is a heme group, and that contains iron. And that it's that iron the luminol reacts with, and that's important because that gives the fluorescence. And it is kind of different from other types of fluorescence, like the door paint, which we see a lot, or cars, because there's a lot of metal in cars, and the paint, of course, is very often reacting. Rust, of course, is reacting. So if we search for blood with luminol, all these things which are not blood are called false positives. And I think every crime scene you go to, you will find false positives. That's why, and also the police and the FBI here introduce an extra test, the phenolphthalein test, or you can do other tests. I think they called UT card. You can do extra tests, which are more sensitive, or not more sensitive, but more reliable in estimating if something is blood or not. So if you have the phenolphthalein test, that's a presumptive test for blood. So after luminol application, you see a suspicious stain. You take a sample from that, and then you can test that for the presence of blood with a more reliable test for blood like phenolphthalein.
They glow differently. Is that a fair understanding? Bleach will glow really bright.
Yeah, bleach is one of. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't answer that question. Yes, bleach is a problem. If people clean with bleach will react with the luminol. So that's a false positive reaction. But of course, also on crime scenes, bleach is more and more used because of this CSI effect by criminals. So that will make the interpretation even more difficult. If the stain was cleaned with bleach, you will get a nice luminescence, nice color of light. But it is false positive. But still, it's also possible that there's blood under that and that you will still detect it and that's positive. So you have to be careful there as well.
When you're discussing this 1 to 100,000 solution before luminol will not pick up blood, is that a fair way to understand it when you're saying it's 1 to 100,000? So you would have to use the 100,000 liters plus to make the blood stain go away or make it undetectable by luminol? Ask that a different way. I can tell by
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Do small quantities of washed away blood cause strong luminescence?
Yes, a little bit depending on the solution. The way we made our solution was that we were not interested in concentrated blood because our assumption was that police officers and experts would find that with the naked eye and don't apply luminol on that. If you have a concentrated stain, that sounds maybe weird, but very often that does not luminesce very well. And you say, well, there's a lot of blood in there, but that's like you get a quenching effect. It means that you inhibit the luminescence of the luminol. So if you have a big pool of blood and you put luminol on top of that, you see some luminescence on the outside, but very often not on the inside. And that's because there's so much blood that it doesn't work very well. Well, if there's a pool of blood that size, you don't want to use luminol. That's stupid. So we made our solution just for more diluted and visible stains, which it work perfectly with. So diluted blood or luminol should be used for diluted blood.
That's a 1240 backup publisher. So this image that's coming up, the one on the couch that we were just looking at, fair understanding of this is everything is blue blood or something else? Was there that much blood or
yeah, you always have to be careful. Luminol is a solution. It's a watery solution. So if you apply it, especially if you use these spray bottles, what we started out with that when we just started the project. What happens is it starts running, and if you look at this picture, can I stand up?
You can talk into that microphone, and you can pull it out if you need to.
So you can see there, as a water solution, you have to be very careful because it starts dripping, running, and that's actually what you can see here. So here you see the blue fluorescence or luminescence, we call it. But here you can see drip patterns. They're also blue. The luminol on itself is reacting also already. If you have a bottle of luminol in the dark, you can see it glow. The luminol on itself is already glowing, but blood will give it an extra, or the false positive material will give it an extra luminescence, and will cause that you can see it like this. So here, see strong luminescence, and then you can here also see that there's droplets, and that is what we saw very often as well. That when you spray, especially with a hand bottle, that you get misted droplets, but the size of these droplets are different. That's why we recommended to use professional spray paint pistol, so that you get a very even mist of luminol, and that you don't get the running, especially on vertical objects, vertical surfaces like here, that it starts running down. And then the other thing, of course, is in order to see this, sometimes you have to spray a little bit more, which is, of course, not so good for the sample. And if you spray more, then also what happens is that your solution starts running and your dripping starts running. And what happens then is that you can see that this also is still luminescing. So that's also the reason that you have to be very careful with interpretation to make the stain basically bigger than in real life.
So moving to publish 1241.
All right.
So is this a photograph you've seen before?
Yes.
And what can you tell the jury about the application of luminol as you look at these photographs?
Well, on these photographs, of course, if you do it in a PowerPoint presentation, you don't see as much detail as you look at the real pictures on your screen.
So, but what's happened here, and tell me if this is consistent with your photography experience, that on the left was the original photograph, and then on the right, there was an addition of blue and light, so the blue stands out more. Is that consistent with your understanding of these photos?
Yeah, I've seen the pictures.
Objection, lack of foundation. There's already been testimony that the entire picture was simply brightened by the agent.
That's I just don't want to create confusion around it. Why there's two of the same thing. So let's move. Anyway.
All right, so you're okay with that explanation as to the difference, correct? That's great. All right. Because that's what I remember.
So if you could point out what stood out to you about how luminol was applied, the dripping, does that say anything to you? And would that have any impact on the blood that is on the couch?
Yeah, so I'm not sure. This picture is, of course, not the best picture to see that on, but on the other picture you could see it, and there's lots of other pictures which were provided by me, which were taken by the police, the FBI. And what you could see is that, the whole couch and seat were luminol was applied to, and that you could see that there was, you could see all these droplets on top of this object, also on the table. And of course, there's this volume of luminol which started running, especially on the vertical surface.
But that's what you were able to see is droplets running down the surface, and that, in your estimation, would have some impact on the evidence?
Yes, of course. As you could see, that the luminol hit some blood on this seat. But yeah, of course, if you apply a lot of luminol or too much luminol in order that the volume gets so big that the gravity just pulls it down, then you get drip patterns, as we call them.
Your Honor, permission to approach.
Yes. Actually, Judge, can we approach the bench briefly? Yes, you may. Thank you. So Judge, understanding that these are demonstrative exhibits, just to explain concepts to the jury, I wouldn't object to them. I believe it's 1248 through 1252.
Is that right, Mr. Moran? 1248 through 52?
Yes, please.
All right. 1248 through 52 are admitted. 1245 is still not admitted, though, in case you're wondering.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Mr. Eichenboom, I've provided some photographs. We're going to put them up here in a second. Do these photographs look familiar?
Yes,
And are these photographs that you provided to me and we provided to the prosecution?
yes,
And these photographs are for demonstrative purposes. You have nothing to do with this case, is that right?
yeah, they're not related to this case.
And are these previous crime scenes you've worked on, or at least crime scenes that you think demonstrate the points that you've been making here?
Yes, so some of them are from crime scenes I worked on, and some of them are from, I think these were colleagues from Canada.
May I direct your attention to the image behind you, and if stepping down helps you to make this point, feel free. Does this illustrate?
Which is that?
1248. Does this illustrate the point that you've described with respect to the sensitivity of luminol?
Yeah, in this sense, it's a good example. You can see before and after, and they probably overlaid this picture with the luminescence on top of the first picture. But you can see here that there's nothing visible here. It's clearly recognizable at the same location, and you have all kinds of marks in there which will make it identifiable where the local stain is. And then you can see this blue luminescence, very strong. And then also you can see that it is much wider than this stepping plate, which are about 3.
Would you say that there is evidence of cleanup present here?
Yeah, so we have to be careful with interpretation. So the blood stain pattern analysis, you have to be careful with what happened there, what was the stain, right? What mechanism was the stain caused? I don't know. There's nothing visible here, or very little. So here, what you could say, okay, well, at least maybe there's support for the hypothesis that something was clean because it was not visible here, and it's very visible here. So yeah, this would support an hypothesis cleaning activity on this location.
Move to publish 1249. So in these images, originally, it's naked to the visible eye or very difficult to see, and then we describe what's going on.
Yeah, so the same here, but here, yeah, the officers can see they describe it as an even bigger scene. So yeah, strong support for cleaning activity in this area. You see some staining, but it's not really clear to people that's the blood. They apply luminol and another presumptive test after that. And then you can see, yeah, you have a large area in front of this table. You see the stepping place, which is obviously or clean.
Does this demonstrate a big bloodletting or a cleanup, can you say?
So yeah, there you have to be very careful. As said, the luminol is extremely sensitive. And of course, laboratory testing, the 1 in 100,000, well, that's not what we see in a crime scene, but what we see in a crime scene is an area which is clean. So what volume of blood could have caused this? Well, actually, I can use a very small amount of blood and then use some, for instance, a tube, pour it over there, and then start cleaning, and I wipe this blood all over the floor during the cleaning activity. And I make the stain much bigger and bigger. So I cannot estimate the volume. It could also be that there was a large pool which was clean. So liter of blood, 2 liters. In your system, liters is half a gallon.
Don't look at me.
So half a gallon or something. So that would be a lot, but you don't know because that's the volume of the blood by cleaning it is taken away. So some people do say, oh, there must be a lot of blood there. You cannot say this from this. It could be quite a small stain, which was just blood around all the time, still staining there, and they make it bigger and bigger. And then they saw the red lining still, so they made it even bigger and more water on it, and then the stain gets bigger and bigger. So somebody should not testify to the amount of blood.
What would your expectation be, given the sensitivity of luminol, if you sprayed it in this room or in a normal home?
When there was blood in the room, or?
Sure. Is it unsurprising that there are small trace amounts of blood that are with innocent explanation?
Yeah. So when we did a lot of crime scenes in the project, and even after that, that was very useful. But what we also always found, nearly always, I remember only one case, it was a homicide though, where we didn't find all kinds of reactions and found blood. But of course, you have to keep in mind that in a house where persons are living, you always find blood with luminol. Maybe not with the naked eye, but if you start bleeding, I could just maybe cleaning my teeth with your gums, or even dry climbing here, then you get blood from the house and then clean it away. You don't see that with the naked eye anymore. So, okay, this is clean, but with the luminol, we always detect those things. So in kitchens, in bathrooms, in nearly every crime scene I went to, we found blood. And of course, later we did the presumptive test and then the DNA, and then we find out that this is not a pure victim, but just some persons who were living there. So in that sense, you're always careful. If you get a positive test, it doesn't always mean that somebody was killed there. It just means you find blood. And you have to put it in the bigger picture, whether or not it was related to a crime.
Yeah, it's published 1250, for the record, 1250.
Yes.
Similar here, something negative, or hidden to the naked eye, you can see it with the luminol.
Yeah, so yeah, this is nice. I didn't take this, but yeah, it's a nice demonstrative that you can sometimes even discard it. This is very well clean, so I don't know which time it was, but you can see this. It's very nicely done. That the part of the picture as it was before manipulation with luminol. Then after over projecting the picture with luminol, you can see there's blood staining. And as I said, carpets. I never seen somebody cleaning a carpet that well that we were not able to detect the blood anymore. Even if it's very well cleaned, as you see here, still luminol will detect it because you don't get it out of the fiber. So the underground is extremely important. If you want to say something about the possibilities of cleaning and how clean it looks and when whether or not you can get blood still.
May I publish 1251 for the record? 1251 coming up. Yes. Yes. Hold on. We're going the other way. This one. Okay. Again, another one where, to the naked eye, this would have appeared like nothing had.
Yeah. So this was a clean crime scene. This is actually a crime scene we did in the Netherlands. So somebody was done to death here. Body was found somewhere outside, dumped. And you had to go in here and then look for, all the blood was just there. And with the naked eye was not so much. There's some small spatter. But when we started investigating with luminol, you could see that there was all kinds of cleanup activity which were not visible to the naked eye anymore. And this is also a picture where we over-projected the stains. So you can see that there was blood on all these locations. And based on the autopsy, not on the blood stains, this person was tortured in this case. And
this was your crime scene, so you would not have sprayed luminol if this was visible to the naked eye.
Yeah. So, but there's two things. You have the DNA sampling part, where you take DNA samples, and then later on, for purposes of the court, if you want to show that, because there was much more. This victim was back to the whole house, or was moved to the whole house. We had luminol positive reactions and this type of thing here that we threw all the house to the basement, into the basement where we found more blood and spatter as well. So this was for reconstructional purposes.
Sir, did you say that this was a blunt force trauma?
Yes.
Homicide? 1252, please. Mr. Eichenblum, this is another one of your crime scenes, is that?
Yes.
Okay. And just another example of a good cleanup that was obvious to you when luminol was applied?
Yes, so what we see here is this was months after we went to, the body was found decapitated somewhere in a ditch in the northern part of Holland. And then they've gone through informants, they found out that the homicide likely would have taken place in this location and sites something in the north. And well, you can see there's not much physical here. We did see some staining, very small staining, of course, examples from those. But then we started to find luminol also for seeing what could have happened there. So at the time of the crime, there would be a bed here somewhere. And so as you can see here, before and after, there's a lot of luminescence. What's important to mention as well is that you see blue fluorescence here, very straight. And actually, that's false positive reaction of the paint on the doors. That's what we see very often. This paint is probably used permanently, and that's a chemical which is gives fluorescence as well. But of course, if you take a picture, you cannot filter that out. It's either fluorescence or not, and if fluorescence, you pick it up. So we tested the door frame, and that was negative. So these things were all positive for blood. Present this test afterwards. So that was a false positive reaction.
Thank you. And meaning to move off this in just a moment, but I've got one more, 1253. I want to make sure that that's okay with Mr. Johnson. That's the more recent one I gave you. It says luminol on it, several photographs.
Judge, I think it's cumulative and unnecessary, so I do object to this one.
Your Honor, if I made it, I don't mean to
I'm
get.
gonna let you put it in if you want. 1253 is admitted.
So I know not all of these are your photographs, but does the one in the top left demonstrate something that stands out to you?
Yeah. I don't know who made it, but of course, yeah, you can see the size there by the person who's sitting there, and there. So like a track mark, but yeah, a lot of bleeding activity, large volume, not large volume, large area.
The one on the top right and the one below it, I think those are your photographs, or at least the bottom right one. But when people wash blood off,
yes,
are you able to detect that with luminol?
Yes, often. As I said, they did quite a lousy job here, because you can see that this was still luminescing here, and it is quite smooth. The bathtub and sinks are made to clean well. You know that there's a lot of staining there. And it's clean for the naked eye, but you still see it here. I did a lot of homicides where thorough cleaning took place, and then with normal the tile floor, the tiles you can clean, but not the seen in between. But in this case, the tiles also lit up.
And then the last point on this issue, bottom left, that's your photograph, so I understood.
No, this one not. I don't think so.
Okay. At any rate, same principles. But you're not able to say how much blood is there.
No.
It's just iron that oxidizes, the luminol is being moved around.
Yes, and on a quite large area, of course. So.
Thank you. That's all I'll have on monstrative photos. So 1243, I'm still on safe ground with that one. It's 1245, I've got issues with it.
Not issues, I'm just requesting a foundation.
So permission to publish defense 1243.
You can publish all of these. You don't have to ask if they're admitted.
1243 is admitted, publishing now. when you, the other photographs you had were of better quality. Is that accurate?
So what do you mean by that? Better quality in sense?
Just that you were able to see that there was liquid on the top of the coffee table.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, it's more difficult to see on PowerPoint pictures, of course. I don't know. But yeah, you could see that there was liquid on the table, which, as I said, is normal because luminol is a fluid, and you will spray fluid on top of an object, or in this case, top. And so yeah, you will see that if you take a picture.
In your expertise, would you suspect if there had been cleanup that there would be fluorescing material in the cracks and other imperfections on the wood there?
Yeah, so as I said, the surface is very important. And as I said, it's a smooth thing, then you can clean it away very, very easily and good if you are thorough. But yeah, with the table, yeah, there's a lot of cracks and yet, so it's not smooth. And that makes it more difficult to clean. So here you have a stain, there's no ruler there, but that's not that big. Information about the size of the cracks and the table itself.
Mr. Eichenboom, is it helpful if I increase the size of the image on the right? I want to demonstrate the droplets that you pointed out.
Yeah. Yeah, if you look here, yeah, I think this is helpful. I don't know if you can see this. Yeah, it looks like that there's fluid on this. And of course, you can see here there's fluid anyway. So this is a picture where luminol was applied.
The jurors will have better pixels of this photograph, but do you recall that there was also droplets running off the side of the coffee table? Such that they would have been falling to the carpet or the rug? They would have been falling to the rug.
So from here on out, Judge, I'm going to object to leading on those types of questions. The expert can just be asked what he saw.
I think that's appropriate. So you can answer that question and then please stop at the leading questions.
Understood. I can find a better photograph of it. Permission to approach with what's been marked for identification as Defendant's Exhibit 1033.
Yes.
Mr. Eichenboom, are you familiar with this photograph?
Yes, I've seen this.
Is this help? Is this a little better than what you were just looking at?
Yeah, yeah,
Does it demonstrate anything on the side of the coffee table that is of note to you?
Yeah, this picture makes
Hold
it.
on. Are you admitting 1033?
Permission to admit and publish.
Yeah, I have no objection, Judge. This is one of those that's already, I think, People's 161. I'm not sure if it's as good a quality from looking at it, but I have no objection.
All right, 1033 is admitted. All right, go ahead.
And sir, is there something on the side of the coffee table that stands out to you?
Yes, if you apply the luminol, of course, in the dark, it's always more difficult to work than if you have light. So you have to move around. So you just apply it, and of course, you don't apply it on top of the surface, but also on the sides. So what you see on this picture is that you have droplets, and of course, on the vertical surfaces, if you use large volumes or with the hand sprayer, it's more easy to get drop formation, and the drops will start running. And that's what you seem to see here on this picture, that there's the droplets hanging on the side of the table.
Would that transfer evidence in your estimation? Can luminol transfer evidence?
Yeah, of course. If it runs, you see that on the picture of the chair very easily. You see the blood, or it was tested positive for blood. So let's assume that it was the whole stain. What you see luminescent was blood. Then from that you see running. Well, of course, actually blood is very soluble in water. Water solution, you're going to clean blood out of your clothing, use water, cold water. And then you can see the stain will get bigger. But also, yeah, on crime scene, if you use this luminol, which is a watery solution, yeah, it will start running, and of course, it will the blood will run down with it for a bit.
In your professional expertise, does this look to be diluted to you? I mean, is this a one-to-one blood droplet, or is this something else?
So, yeah, of course, the interpretation, we have to be very careful. I don't know if this was a droplet or a transfer. You can see on the picture itself that the outer sides are diluted. And that's why I say, okay, we use the professional spray paint so that you get a very fine film. Yeah, you have to be careful with what you see here. But yeah, it looks like that the blood is running out. Yeah, on where it starts getting fainter. So yeah, the blood will dissolve by the watery solution and then start running actually through the cracks a little bit. They're not nerves, but there's relief in there, like on this table. And yeah, you can see that it starts running about there. And that's pretty normal. But it even could happen with if you use spray paint.
So if that blue there is approximately the size of a dime, would you say there's a dime-sized drop of blood on that table?
I wouldn't call it drop. If you don't know, we have this terminology thing, and if you don't know the mechanism which makes it, just call it stain. A drop will indicate a blood drop that you eat yourself, and a drop of blood came out of the finger or nose and drop from there. That would be bigger than this probably in good shape. So it's just a blood stain. We don't know the mechanism, blood stain. So there was blood here because it tested positive, I think. And not tested positive was presented testing, and not failing at least. So there was blood on the table. For the size, I would say smaller than at least the luminescence you see, because we know it's running. And then, yeah, it would have been helpful to have a ruler there, but yeah, it's pretty small.
It's different. It has different characteristics than a drop of blood was. I mean, if that was red and that was a drop of blood, I'm sorry to use drop again, but that just has different characteristics than a drop would. Is that fair?
Yeah. A droplet of blood, I would have photographed it before I started applying luminol, because then we changed the appearance. I didn't see, I looked at the pictures, all of them, I could find on this and see if there a way that I could find the stain before the luminol was applied. I couldn't. So I'm not sure the picture I had was before or after, but I never saw the staining. So it's quite difficult to see, or I didn't see anything before or after the application of luminol on this location in the table. So it was kind of an invisible stain.
Mr. Eichenblum, in looking at this image, is it your professional opinion that a crime occurred because of this blue dot?
Objection is argumentative.
I don't think he can answer that question. I mean, based upon one small piece of something. Okay, you might be able to get there.
Okay, I'll unpack it. Can you say conclusively, based on your crime scene investigation expertise, that what we see in blue here, this luminol, indicates that there was a blunt force trauma in this room?
Hold on. You're talking about the whole room?
I'm talking about this specific thing.
Well, that's what I just said. I didn't think you could do it. I think you have to do it on a bigger basis.
The next question was about the couch, but that's fine. I'm happy to ask it that way.
And then if you want to drill down, I guess you could do it that way.
Okay, thank you. Sir, based on the imagery you're observing, specifically with respect to the luminol fluorescing in this room, or luminescing, are you able to say that there was a crime that occurred in this room?
So yeah, we're talking about all the stains and luminol positive reactions.
Yes, sir.
So what's important, of course, is that with the luminol, we have the false positive reaction, so it has to be positive for the presenter test as well, and also tested by the lab later on, because there's some stains which there's questions about whether or not later on it was blood. So, but if you just talk about blood stains which were observed, and then of course what's also important, without talking too much about the DNA, but what's important of course is the source of blood. Who was the source of blood? And if you have a mixture of DNA, then you don't know the source of blood, because then there's like 2 or 3 persons in there. One of those persons, or all 3 of them, that we don't know, could have donated blood onto the sample. So it's important for blood pattern analysis to know the source of blood, and there's actually only one on the chair where there's a single source. There's tested positive blood, presumptive tested positive blood, and that was confirmed for DNA Dylan. So strong hypothesis, strong support for the hypothesis that Dylan donated blood on the chair. The other ones, there's mixtures.
I should have unpacked this more before you. Okay. Based on the luminol alone, would you say that there is proof of blood force trauma, bloodletting in this room?
No, but as said, luminol is not a very good item to do blood pattern analysis with, because it distorts your blood stains or your blood splatter, which you need for blood force. Then you would expect blood splatter. Hit somebody on the head several times, then you get the splatter on the walls and the carpet, and the floors and tables. So you would see the small splatter, and then we would do all kinds of calculations and screening, find out of this area of origin, and to find out whether or not really a blood was infected place in blood of Dylan. Well, that was not found in this study.
So outside of the couch, so there's the spot on the couch was Dylan.
Towards you a little bit.
Sorry. The blood on the love seat was Dylan alone. Yep. Does that amount of blood, as luminesced by luminol, suggest to you that there was bloodletting that caused the death at that spot?
No, you have to, as I said, what happens is that you have all kinds of daily occurrences, and I don't know if Dylan was a rough guy, but I remember for myself that I feel that regular bloodletting incidences where I set my fingers, I get bleeding down nosebleeds by the right time. So you don't need a lot of blood to create luminescence we see on that chair.
I think it's okay to have a seat now. It sounds like the application of luminol here was not how you would do it, or you've come up with a better way to apply it so it's more even, it doesn't pool like that?
Yes, we started out with the spray bottles, and we found, you could see that on the first picture where we used the spray bottles, that, it's especially vertical objects, the dripping starts actually after the first sprays already. But in order to see it well, and the metal group in the blood is kind of concealed. That's why you have the luminescence a little bit longer than with false positives. So often, and I think that's what happened here as well, you spray at one location, you don't give it one spray, but you give a little bit extra to get more luminescence. But of course, the disadvantage of that is that it starts dripping. So then we start thinking, okay, how can we apply this kind of force to the surface you're treating with luminol without getting the dripping effect? And then we came out with this very fine mist used by painting spray pistols. That's what we start using in the Netherlands.
Is some reason you would do that so that you're not diluting it and making it run?
Yeah, especially for the pictures, of course. You distort the pictures with the running and all the luminol. And of course, also with DNA, if it's a very small stain, diluting it won't help with DNA testing, of course. And there's all kinds of chemicals in there, especially hydrogen peroxide and sodium hydroxide, which are kind of aggressive. There's some discussion about how bad it is for your DNA, but anybody can feel that it is not good to apply these chemicals onto your DNA sample.
So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk to you about luminol photography. Are there sort of three ways to, or three things you do to properly photograph something, specifically with respect to range?
Yeah, of course, as I said, luminol photography is difficult because you have to do it in the dark, and then you always come up with some kind of manipulation. And we used all kinds of methods to achieve this, and not all of them are such nice pictures as we took there. It's very time consuming. Every object actually you have to take still, and then you have to change to the other object. So it's time consuming if you do it very thoroughly. But what we, and I think they did as well, you take a picture before you start the investigation so that you have a good location. What we do is we put it on a tripod camera, take a picture before that, keep the camera still and all locations, put a ruler in there, and then you start applying the luminol. And then you use how you call that, a mirror reflex camera, Nikon. And then you take the picture before, and then you leave the camera in the exact same position, and then you take the picture again in the dark, but you leave the camera open as long, or the lens is open as long as needed to detect the luminescence, because as you can see, it's very difficult to detect that. And if you use a normal camera or your phone, it will just only detect if it goes click, click, then you don't even detect the luminescence. So you have to leave your camera lens open, and that makes it more difficult. So you take the picture before, during, and then after you find it, and you can see that here as well, we use small needles because that's working in the dark. Keep in mind, it's completely dark, so you put some markers there. Here they use like, I think it was sticks from swabs. But you have to mark the locations where you find the luminescence, because you need to take a sample later on. So we used small needles, and then we mark those locations, and then later on you take a sample from those. I think they use the small wooden sticks you see in the pictures here. And then you take the sample. But what we would do is we would take the sample straight away from the object and test that for blood. I think the procedure over here is that they take the swab and they test the swab for blood, which is fine as well.
Yeah. Also, when taking these photographs, you do an overall mid-range and close-up?
Yeah.
Was that done with the photographs that you were provided here?
No, not always, no.
Were there rulers in the photographs, and is it proper to use rulers?
Yeah, of course, and especially with the luminol, it's good to know how big the stains are, because you don't want to do over-interpretation or to do too much interpretation, but yeah, the sizes of stains, of course, are important to know. So, yes, at one point you would like to have at least a ruler in there. And of course, with luminol application, this could be difficult, because if you put your ruler exact on top of the blood stain, you have to redo it again.
Publishing 1168, above, I beg your pardon, 1244? 1244. Mr. Eichenboom, is this spatter? Can you say with any confidence that that's what we're seeing here in the image taken in front of the love seat? This did not test positive for blood, so is there anything you can offer the jury about what's going on here?
Yeah, so
Objection, Judge, that actually, counsel may just be mistaken, but this is in the northeast corner, I believe, and that did test positive for blood. So I don't know if counsel is mistaken about that, or if I'm looking at the picture wrong. Is that People's 167 in your?
My recollection is that that's in front of the love seat, so east side, kind of towards the door.
We have plenty of exhibits counsel can refer to that have been admitted and testified, I think 340, and those indicate this is the northeast corner, and it did test positive for the female and the human trace.
Well, assuming that it tested positive for blood. Is there anything you can say about whether this is blood spatter, or what would you?
Well, as I said before with the luminol, you have to be very careful. The luminol is applied as very small droplets, and actually that's spatter. So you see very small droplets, but the implication of the blood, which is made luminous, or blood, if there was blood there, made it luminous, then you have to be careful with the interpretation of the pattern. So I would call it blood spatter. Okay. The picture is not clear enough to do determination of this is blood spatter or something else.
Does this indicate evidence of cleanup?
Yeah, so as you saw the other examples of cleanup in real crime scenes, not related to this case, you could see that these are quite large areas. There was a serious blood incident there. And as I said, you might have seen someone was tortured there, that's more or less to death, and the other one was decapitation. So, yeah, there's no skill here, but you can see something of the tripod. But, yeah, these are not extreme, the big stains, luminol. So.
And would you expect to see sort of more wiping or flattening of the blue with a white?
Yeah, with typical cleaning.
Objection. Judge, he's already testified that you shouldn't be doing that with these photographs. He's already testified you can't draw conclusions from photographs like this. Now he's being asked by counsel more specific questions to make those very conclusions.
Hold on.
It's more clear with Defense Exhibit 1041B.
So you're just moving on then?
Yes. I'll
Okay. All right.
make this point better with the other exhibit.
So 1041B.
Please, and before I publish that, may I approach one?
Please don't do B's and C's. I told you guys not to do that beforehand, okay? That just is a real problem with record keeping. So I know this case is almost over, but in the future, don't do that. Thank you. That's it.
It sounds like there's no objection. I'd move to publish 1041.
No objection?
That's correct, Judge.
It's admitted, and it can be published.
Does this one help? Any indication here that there's wiping?
I said before, you have to be careful with conclusions, but yeah, the cleaning activity is the one thing with luminol you can say something about, but you don't see clearly that some wet bloody object was wiped.
I think it will be towards the bottom of the pile of photographs I gave you, sir. And it says Defense Exhibit 1245 on it. If I can have you move to that one. This one has not been admitted. This one, the prosecution's requesting some foundation. If you need another copy, I have one here. Permission to approach.
Sure. Oh, no, I don't have that one yet.
Mr. Eichenboom, have you seen these two photographs before?
Yes, I think these are photographs we took during the evidence viewing.
So at the La Plata County Sheriff's Office, you brought a camera and took some pictures of evidence that they were holding there?
Yes.
And are these fair and accurate representations of pieces of evidence that you observed at the Sheriff's Office?
Yes.
Permission to approach.
With that, Judge, I have no objection.
Are they photographs of what you're approaching with? And which is? All right. 1245 is admitted.
Your Honor, permission to publish the image of this exhibit that's been entered.
Yes.
And I don't know if I moved to enter it, but I would move to do that as well.
I just submitted it.
Great, thank you. So, sir, on the left, what do you see? I'm referring to the image behind you now. Sorry. And is it the same thing that's sitting in front of you here?
Yes.
And when you were at the sheriff's office taking a look at this, did something on this piece of evidence stand out to you?
Yes. Yeah, when we review the evidence, you look for all kinds of materials. As I said, I'm not an expert in everything, but of course, you look for all kinds of evidence to find. Working with multidisciplinary teams, you learn a little bit about other things. So, and then you look at things that stand out, and then, of course, you look at the damage. You look at, in this case, yeah, something, I don't know what the meaning of it is, but yeah, there's the sticker of the banana thing, I think, Chiquita. And it's stuck onto the, because we tested that, okay, I thought first, I've seen this picture taken by crime scene officers, or not this picture, but of course pictures by crime scene officers, the sticker is already there. And I thought it was more or less loose on the evidence, so it's just by coincidence it was there. But when we looked at it and tested it, you could see that it was still stuck onto the clothing.
Mr. Eichenboom, will you take a look at the piece of evidence that's on the witness stand? Do you still see that sticker?
Yes, it's still there.
Could it be possible to get touch DNA off of a Chiquita banana sticker?
Yes.
How about fingerprints?
Fingerprints can be taken from all kinds of smooth objects, and stickers are that. So I won't guarantee a result, but it would have been a possibility to test one.
And the sticky side of a sticker, is that a place where fingerprints would be left?
Yeah, of course, if you grab it, especially with touch DNA, sticky tape, we get very good results with touch DNA on sticky tape. And yeah, for fingerprints, it has to be kind of smooth. But the smoother the object, the better, the bigger the chance that you get a good object. And then size, well, the size of the finger, so there would have been a chance to obtain results of that.
In your expert opinion, is there reason to think that the placement of this is accidental or something else?
Objection.
Yeah.
He already testified that he can't even draw a conclusion from this.
I don't know how you can make a conclusion on the placement.
The way it's wrapped around that piece of cloth. I think he put it in his report.
This was in his report?
It's in his interview too. He said he can't draw any conclusions, and he just testified consistently and fairly with that.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Which you can have a seat if that's more comfortable. Pardon me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, but what is adipocere?
Yeah, adipocere is a kind of waxy solution, waxy material, and we see that very often when bodies are decomposing, and especially with clothing. If the clothing is still on the body, then during decomposition you get this waxy kind of material on there.
And hold on just a second. Can you just, for the record, spell it as best you can?
ADIPOCERE.
Thank you.
Did you observe something that you thought may be adipocere on this shirt?
Yes, of course, we didn't test it, and so this is observations made during the view of evidence, and then based on your experience, what you've seen in other cases, but that of course doesn't make it so. And knowing the circumstances in this case that his body was there at least for 2 years, for around 2 years, for a long time at least outside. And then you get this typical staining, which you can see in several of these items, what looks like to be adipocere, and that could be, well, pieces of tissue from billing.
Permission to approach.
Yes.
Showing counsel what's been marked for identification as Defendant's Exhibit 1198 and 1216.
Since they're up, I'm gonna make no objection.
All right.
I'm being told that I may have messed up my numbers. And Judge, we are not doing this to confound the court. When we're trying to respond to evidence, we're building on the numbers we started with, and that's why they're not sequential.
No objection to 1216. No objection to 1148.
1216 and 1148 or 98?
98.
They're both admitted.
So these are just closer images of what we've been describing.
Yes. Close-ups.
Permission to publish 1216.
Why not?
Again, this is just a better quality image of what we've been talking about.
Yeah, we took several samples, of course, of several pictures, and then the overall mid-range and close-ups. And some of them, if there's an indication, we would also use a digital microscope to go even deeper on some kinds of details. I don't think we did use it on this one, but we took a close-up.
Because you were at the sheriff's office and didn't have your laboratory equipment.
Yeah, it would, of course, in our own lab, we have more possibilities. It would have been preferable to have the evidence and also do your own presumptive testing, but that was not allowed. So, yeah, this was just an evidence view. And then, we have to make some assumptions of what you see.
What you believe may have been adipocere, your technique here would have been to put that under a microscope or do further testing?
With the adipocere, you could do further testing if you wanted to know. Of course, you have to look at the context. In this case, you could do literally millions of testing, DNA testing, and you have to see whether it's important or not. With adipocere, we also specifically looked for it, and also with the sticker, it's okay. You wanted to know in this situation whether or not Dylan was still wearing his clothing, or maybe that the clothing was taken off. If there's adipocere on the clothing and all kinds of other staining, then there could be an indication that his clothing was off at the time when it was found, or at the time then when he died. The adipocere would be an indication that this type, or this piece of evidence was still in contact with his skin at the time when he died and after that.
Will you tell the jury what ALS is?
Alternate light source. This is what you probably all have seen in crime scene investigation CSI series. It's basically a blue light, and then you use orange goggles. We use different filters. You can use all kinds of filters: yellow, green, blue. But yeah, normally it's blue light. We can adjust the light source as well, and then you can take pictures and see if something fluoresces in the dark. So that's also taken in the dark. And well, with adipocere and blood, that can be helpful. Like with blood, absorbs most of the light, so you don't see it, but you can see it sometimes as a black stain. So that could be indication of blood. And then with adipocere and bodily fluids, those fluoresce very often with alternate light sources. So then you have an indication, and it's just a presumptive test as well, then with light, that it could be bodily fluids. But of course, after you find a suspicious stain, as we call it, then further testing would be recommended.
were you able to use an alternative light source in this?
Yes, we used alternate light sources. We used strong blue light and infrared. And infrared, especially used on dark objects. And then what sometimes happens is that the dark object, when we had it with the shoelace in this case, becomes white. And then, but the blood still absorbs light and it becomes black. So then if you see, if you have a white surface, it didn't happen with the shirt, unfortunately. But then background becomes white and then the black stains are of interest because then you think, okay, that could be blood. And of course, you have to do presumptive testing to find out, but we were not allowed to do that.
And did you observe fluorescence with the alternative light source on evidence in this case?
Yes, I'm not sure exactly where, but yeah, we did see it from some of the pieces.
So, Your Honor, at this point, I object. The disclosure in the report and the interview, there's absolutely no reference to any recommendation for further testing. So that opinion was never conveyed to the prosecution or rendered prior to this testimony, and it shouldn't be allowed.
That is not accurate. There were recommendations in the report that we provided from independent forensic services.
I don't know, so I can't make a decision based upon that. I'm going to allow this to go forward, but please make sure you confine yourself to the report. And while we're stopped, do you have much more for this recommendation?
We're in the home stretch, Your Honor.
Well, what does that mean in terms of time?
We should probably take a break.
It doesn't sound good.
I think 15, 20 minutes, but I would hate to keep
Then it's
anyone.
time to take a break. Just this type of testimony is hard on the report. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please remember your admonitions, not to talk to each other. Don't make any decisions about the case until this is over with. And we'll start up again at 10:20. Everybody ready to agree? All right, we're in recess.
You can sit down, but we're not going to talk. You do whatever, you got them all.
How you doing, sir? I'm good.
Yes, I'm like that. Subject to you. Subject to it. We'll get into everything later. I say mid-morning.
What's that?
I'm sure the sanction. Yeah, I'm gonna put some up there. Maybe switch over to, so I guess we'll just do.
Well, my understanding is that he's indicated that he doesn't want. Oh, sure. Then yeah, he's downstairs. There's two of those rooms. I'm not sure which one of the two. And so that this doesn't cause you concern or worry, we don't instruct people not to speak. In fact, we encourage them to cooperate in the investigation. Yeah. He's been endorsed for months.
Be seated if you want. And just let's put on the record. So, yeah, well, I guess we don't need to. We're gonna need to have a hard stop at 10 to noon, so everybody knows. I'm sure that's something I have to do right between noon and 1. Everyone ready for the jury? Okay, please be seated. So we will, understand one of the jurors has something to do at noon. We'll make sure we stop at 10 till. If we don't, somebody needs to say something, okay? So we'll give you enough time for that. And I meant to tell you this morning where we were in terms of our schedule. It looks like evidence will be done, this week. And that we will be able to do closing arguments and you guys can start deliberations. That'll either be Thursday or Friday. Now, you never know, things can be pushed back, but that's what it looks like right now. So the other thing that I wanted you to know is once you begin your deliberations, the jury's more or less in charge of the schedule, not me. You can set your own hours. You can keep coming in from 8 to 5, that's fine. If you want to work late, that's fine. If you want to work on Saturday, you can do that. Just try and work through this, your deliberations. I can't let you work on Sunday because sheriff and other people have to pay double time for that, but we can have you come in on Saturdays if you want to. I'm not saying you have to, but just be thinking about that. That's nothing you have to decide now, but I know you all have different schedules. So, with that, Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Eichenblum, we were talking about some of the things that you pointed out in your report. And it's fair to say that because of the limitations of where you were observing items, that you weren't able to utilize the full or all of the things you have available to you at your laboratory.
That's correct.
So you talked about things that could be done or further steps that could be taken.
Yes, there's of course, I said, the presumptive test. If you have what we call a suspicious stain, then you would like to use a presumptive test just to touch it a little bit and see if there's blood in there. With the adipose here, often there's blood in there, and then, yeah, that makes it more likely that there's something of tissue and blood and that kind of stuff in there. So that's an important test to do.
To your knowledge, after you pointed out the adipose here in a report we provided to the government, did they do any follow-up?
I'm not aware of that.
Judge, this is mischaracterizing it. An observation is different than a suggestion for an investigative step, which is what counsel was suggesting before.
I'm not meaning to split that hair. We told them about these things. And
yeah, and it's their decision what to do. So it's been pointed out. We just move on.
Understood. I'd like to put up, I forget the number, 1198 again. Just a follow-up on this, sir. It's like TV went off. Over the break, I had an opportunity to look at your report again, and I just want to ask what your assessment of the sticky side being adhered to the shirt is. And if you don't remember writing something in your report about it, I can refresh your recollection with the report.
Yes, please do. I don't know every sentence or every conclusion.
Okay. May I approach?
You may.
Let me know. I'm not asking you to read it out loud into the record. Just if that refreshes your recollection, let me know. So does that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
May I approach?
Yes.
In thinking about and observing this piece of evidence, particularly that sticker, what sort of conclusions were you able to draw?
Yeah, when you do this type of investigations, you never know whether or not it becomes important. So you just observe and try, well, make your observations. And then, yeah, with this, what the observation was that the sticker was glued onto the fabric. And first, what I said, well, what I thought it could have been that it just was bare by coincidence, but now it looks like it was already there, which is kind of interesting, of course, because also if it was put on there, it's not logical, or not always logical that the piece of evidence stays there during these 2 years, because rain and watery conditions dissolve this glue type of stuff. But it was still there, so it's an observation.
Did you
remarkable
have
observation.
pardon me. Did you have an impression as to whether or not this was accidentally on there or something else?
So yeah, no. If you look at this, then you would say, okay, it seemed that this whole sticker was just put on there and was sticking about the majority of the sticker was sticking towards the garment. So it looked like that it was put in there on purpose. But,
and did you make any assessment based on your expertise in evidence collection and analysis as to whether or not, or when the sticker would have been placed on the shirt?
Yeah, well, I said it's not likely that if the sticker was just floating around, and as we see very often with crime scenes, especially with prostitutes, you have all kinds of debris lying in the forest. I'm not sure about this location. I think there was some stuff there as well. And it's completely not crime related or related to the crime. In this situation, I'm not sure what it means, but it seemed that the sticker was on there, before or during the time that Dylan was wearing the shirt. It was stuck on there, and actually, quite surprisingly, it was also there after almost 2 years.
Not accidental and put there at or around the time of death.
Yeah, that's what you would expect. If the sticker came there during, I said it's accidental, what we see very often on crime scenes. Yeah, you wouldn't expect it to stick like this. And sometimes you still have some sticky parts, but then it's very loose. But this, I really use a pair of tweezers to put on it, and it's still. I think you can still test it if you wanted. It's stuck there. But yeah, it was kind of a surprising finding. And that's why I mentioned it, but I'm not sure how it's related to the crime otherwise.
May I approach?
Yes.
I've provided the prosecutor, or with the witness with what's previously been admitted, prosecutor 311. Mr. Eichelblum, did you have an opportunity to look at this?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you observe any tissue present on it?
So,
And if it would refresh your recollection.
I don't remember if this was the shoe.
If you don't remember, I can refresh your recollection. Would it refresh your recollection to look at your report? Commissioner Approach.
Yes.
So yeah,
Did you write in your report that there was possible tissue associated with this shoe?
yes, I said if we do this investigation, it's what we look for suspicious staining, and that's what you do then is you do some presumptive testing or DNA testing afterwards if you want to know that. And
Included in your report that was turned over to the prosecution, is that right?
yes, this is included in there. And then so there's suspicious. Yeah, it's like I said, that type of waxy material, kind of, gluey as well. And yeah, you see some of that on the shoe. So,
Mr. Eichelblum, I want to move your attention to another issue. As was discussed quite some time ago now, it is not surprising to find the blood of persons that live in that house. Is it also unsurprising to you that an overnight guest, that you may find small amounts of that person's blood in the house?
yes, of course, it's the type of action somebody do in the house, playing, fighting with brothers or whatever. But yeah, that's possible. And like having a bleeding nose, I have them everywhere, not only in my own house. That could happen.
Overnight guest, even just a half a dozen times or so, that's someone who could still deposit blood in your professional opinion.
Yes, that's possible.
And have you ever studied, is there any research or have you come across in your expertise that children may be more likely to deposit small amounts of blood? That's everybody.
Not really a study of peer review, I think, but on the crime scenes we did, and I said we find it in kitchens and bathrooms, and then we always have DNA of the suspect and the victims, and then with other family members very often we don't. So what happens then is that you find blood of somebody unknown to the case, and then you later get information that there are also children living there or other relatives, and then you know, okay, probably one of those. And if it's not relevant to the case, you don't type them out. If it's relevant to the case, then you could type them out for DNA. So that sometimes happens.
But suffice to say, blood in the house doesn't mean a crime occurred there, right?
No, these persons are still alive, and then yeah, if you type them out, then you know, okay, they left a little good blood, and you go back to information you have of those people, and then later on, yeah, they sometimes describe that as small injury or something.
Was there evidence of cleanup based on what you saw in the pictures at Mark Redwine's house?
No, based on the evidence, the luminescence, as you could compare to those examples we gave, though it is not extreme. It's just, yeah, the size is a couple of inches, most of it, and then some of it is even bigger because of the dripping effect. So based on that, yeah, you cannot conclude that there was a cleanup.
I think you mentioned flossing, but like could picking a scab or a minor cut cause the sort of blood that was observed on the front of the love seat?
Yeah, that's possible.
You also, Commissioner Approach.
Yes.
I've provided the witness, prosecutors 198. Mr. Eichenboom, did you have an opportunity to look at these clothes?
Yes.
And in your observation, did you see anything on those clothes that indicated the presence of blood?
No, I don't think so.
And if there had been a bludgeoning or blunt force trauma and or a dismemberment, would you expect to find blood on the clothing of a person who did a murder by bludgeoning or dismembered a body?
Yes, if the clothing was worn and you beat somebody up, then force is applied on blood, so you spatter. So it's just not one time beating, but several times, especially on the head. That some of that blood spatter will likely, not always, but likely very often, come back towards the perpetrator. And of course, if you start dismembering a body, the chance of you getting blood on you is quite big. You have to be very careful to not get that, and especially depending on what type of tools you use. If you start using high-speed machinery, which we saw in Holland several times, but also manual, which is very difficult. Yeah, the chance that you get DNA and blood on you during dismemberment of bodies is quite big.
So Eichenboom, in your professional judgment, would a pair of shoes worn by somebody who did a bludgeoning and dismemberment look like this or something else? And I can approach with you if you'd like to take a closer look. I've provided the witness prosecutor's exhibit 197, Mr. Redwine's white shoes.
I think I've reviewed the reports on the shoes and clothing of Mr. Redwine, and there's what we call the suspicious stains from colorations, and you can see a lot of negatives on here. I assume that those were locations tested. That's what the investigators normally do or often do. You take a small sample of location of interest or of suspicion, take a sample of it, and then you test it. Well, looking at the staining on the shoe, it's what we call staining, and maybe transfer. You have to be careful, but yeah, it tested negative for blood, so blood sample analysis is not really of interest. And there's no spatter on it, so as described, if you really beat someone, you could expect blood spatter on shoes. We very often find those. If those were the shoes which were worn during the incident, of course. And then, you go from there, but it's not observed here.
Any evidence of dismemberment on those shoes?
I'm not sure how you would see the dismemberment. You have to be careful what type of action it caused. With dismemberment, in my experience, what you sometimes have is bigger staining because blood is pouring out of some of the body parts. But yeah, there's no blood on the shoes, so there's no proof of him.
Okay, thank you, sir. Does the overall luminol analysis at the house of Mr. Redwine and on the clothes that you've just been looking at support the hypothesis that a bloody act of violence against Dylan Redwine occurred?
No, it does not.
Does the overall luminol analysis on Mr. Redwine's clothing support the hypothesis that he committed a bloody act of violence against Dylan Redwine?
There was no blood found on the clothing, so these clothing did not support it.
If the child was hit with a foam football, could that cause a small amount of blood that would not get on the ball?
Yes, you probably have this from your own experience. If you get hit on the nose by a ball on the nose, sometimes you feel the pain straight away, but then if you start looking, it just takes a second or maybe even longer before the blood starts dripping out. And of course, the ball is already gone if it bounces into your face. So yeah, it can take some time, and it would explain why you would not get blood on the ball if it hits your face. You would expect such a DNA though.
Switching gears here, outside the house, did you observe photographs of where remains were recovered on Middle Mountain?
Yes.
When remains are discovered on a remote mountainside, is there a proper protocol to follow to make sure you're collecting all available evidence?
Yeah, I think there are several protocols. I think the FBI wrote protocols for that as well. But yeah, what we normally do if something is found, or in a situation where you find a body, you start marking off the area. You then take a step back, make a plan of approach, and then before you go to the evidence, you make a walking path where which is the least likely. So you assume that it could be a homicide. You always do that, even if you don't know the cause of death yet. You assume this could be a crime and that you have to prosecute it. So then you make a walking path. So you make a perimeter. And in this situation, that would have been rather big. And then you make a path which is the least likely that a possible perpetrator would have walked there. Then, of course, you start filming, videotaping, making pictures of the wider area, and then you're closing in on your object or body or pieces of bones in the situations. And then, yeah, from there on, you start going closer and closer, and then you start doing your sampling and taking close-ups.
If some time has passed, is there a reason to excavate, and is that something you would have recommended based on what you saw, the photographs of the mountainside?
Well, yeah, and this field of protocol.
This is beyond the scope. This is a question for an anthropologist, Judge.
Crime scene investigation.
Pardon me?
It's crime scene investigation.
Yeah, I don't think you'd go too deep into it, but I think this is appropriate.
Yeah, so in this situation, there was, on the pictures you can see there's kind of a burrow, and where it's possible that the body was in there. So we have quite often actually that bodies are buried. And that's also a crime scene. It doesn't matter if they're on the ground or in the ground. And the approach is the same, of course. You want to preserve as much from possible perpetrators, bodies don't bury themselves. So somebody was involved there. So then you try to collect as much evidence from the outer ring towards the inner ring. You go down, and then you very slowly excavate, like these not architects. How you call these people? Archaeologists. Sorry. Like an archaeologist, actually, and then in a forensic way. In that sense, the archaeologists, you have forensic archaeologists who slowly uncover the body and try to select as much evidence and find as much evidence as you can.
Not doing so could create a lack of evidence. Would you agree?
Yeah, of course, you always try to.
Sorry. I just sort of needed there. Pardon me for interrupting, but also you said the word burrow. Is what you're describing is an area between two trees?
Yeah, so there's one of the pictures. I think you see a tree stump, and then there's some bush and bushy material there.
And was your understanding that some remains had been found sort of between those two trees in that area? That they refer to it as two trees. Oh, you're referring to it from that.
Oh, sorry. Somewhere, the term burrow came up, but a place to hide, which is
I could move on. So sorry to interrupt. I'm just trying to be considerate of time here. I've got a picture of it. I think that might make it easier for you to describe it. Permission to publish People's 331.
Yes.
So is this the area that you're describing?
Yes.
Okay. Would it be appropriate, in your opinion, as a crime scene analyst, to dig around in this area with sticks as you've recovered items of evidence?
What do you mean with sticks?
It sounds like the approach that you take would be different.
Objection. There's a lack of foundation here, and I'd renew my objection that there's been testimony from board-certified forensic anthropologist in this case, and we're about to ask him about archaeological work in the woods.
Investigator Patterson talked about how they were looking around digging with sticks in this area.
I understand that. But he did talk about it would be appropriate to have an archaeologist come and basically process the scene. And I don't think he's an expert in terms of archaeology or how that would work. So I'm going to suspend the objection at this point. You've got the evidence about the six. You've got the evidence from other forensic archaeologists. So I think that's where we're going to leave it.
Switching gears here, sir. Thank you. You also reviewed information and viewed pictures related to search of a Dodge pickup truck. You recall that?
Yes.
Was there any reliable evidence to support a hypothesis that Dylan Redwine's body was transported in the Dodge pickup?
No, there was not.
Was there any reliable evidence to support the hypothesis that Dylan Redwine's body was transported in a Chevy pickup truck?
No, I didn't see that.
Without going into anthropology, is there sufficient evidence for a crime scene investigator with expertise like you have to conclude that a violent human act caused Dylan's death?
No, not based on the blood stains found. Actually, the one stain on the couch, you cannot draw that conclusion.
Thank you, sir. The prosecutor will have some questions for you.
Go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
You talked a lot about things that you couldn't rule in terms of, like, for example, the blood evidence. You couldn't conclude necessarily that an injury had occurred, right?
But if there's blood, there's always an injury of some kind, except for certain diseases.
And you talked a little bit about how you couldn't, based on the evidence on the clothing, you couldn't say for certain or that there was some kind of dismemberment, right? You remember all those questions?
Yes.
Based on the blood evidence that you looked at in the case, you also can't rule those things out. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Let's start by talking just a little bit about your background. In your credentials, we talked about your pattern analysis and training and education. You recall that?
Yes.
The training and education portion of your CV goes up to about 2002 in those areas for the main trainings, right?
Sorry, for what?
For the primary trainings, like you talked about Ontario, you talked about Miami-Dade. Those are back around 2002?
Yes.
Okay. And then your work in the national lab was until about 2005, right?
That's correct.
And after that, you had your private lab.
That's correct.
So for about 15 years since then, it's been all work through your private lab.
Yes.
Okay. And you said 2011 you moved to the U.S.?
That's correct.
And when we talked, you explained to me that since you've been out in the U.S., you haven't done much with fresh crime scenes at all, right?
That's correct.
And even in your time from 2005 on with your private lab in the Netherlands, you hadn't done much with fresh crime scenes.
We did more crime scenes then. So we still did do crime scenes. We worked still for the prosecution, especially in the beginning of our own laboratory.
Understood.
But not as much. When I worked at the national lab, we did 80 crime scenes a year.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's
right. And that was back in before 2005.
Yes.
All right. And then when you came here, you said maybe a couple crime scenes a year, but those typically weren't fresh crime scenes, correct?
That's correct.
And most of the work you've done in the U.S. has been out of the lab, right?
Yes.
And you look at photographs of evidence, for example?
Yes.
Sometimes you yourself process items of evidence, right?
Yes.
And you yourself will advise sometimes on locations where additional testing can be done, right?
That's correct.
You've never been employed with law enforcement in the U.S., is that correct?
Employed in the sense that they hired us, or employed?
No, like you've never been a law enforcement officer?
No.
And you've never worked for, like, for example, a state lab in the U.S.? Like
No.
CBI, nothing like that?
I worked with them. I've been there, but you mean that I'm employed?
Yes.
No, I was never employed.
It's been all your private lab during that time? Okay. And you've never testified in court in the U.S. about the application of luminol at a actual crime scene, like a residence?
No, I don't think so.
I just want to ask you about your education a little bit. You do not have a PhD, correct?
That's correct.
And you do not have a medical degree?
No.
And you do not have a master's degree?
No.
And you and your lab, you're part owner of that lab, right?
That's correct.
And you and your lab were hired here by the defendant to do work on this case, right?
The defendant, yes,
Right. And additionally, your wife is one of the owners and partners there, right?
that's correct.
And she was also hired with you, with your company, to do work in this case.
That's correct.
And between the two of you, you're hired to talk about crime scene analysis, right?
Yes,
And pattern analysis of blood.
yes,
And your company's also hired to talk about cut marks
yes,
and blunt force trauma.
yes,
So anthropology, right? These would be anthropology type disciplines.
Injuries is just medical.
Okay. And let's talk about that. You and your company were also hired to talk about medical evidence in this case.
Yes,
And that includes cause of death.
yes.
And that includes manner of death.
Objection, Your Honor. I'm going to object to things that they can do that we're not endorsing them, and it's beyond the scope.
Judge, their company was hired to cover just about every forensic discipline there is in this case.
So you're, all right. I think you can go into it.
So opinions on cause of death, manner and death, et cetera, those are also things your company was hired to do.
Yes, it's more the part of my wife as medical. Of course, we work together. And of course, blood stain, pattern evidence has a lot to do with injuries. You want to know what type of injuries a victim has. That will explain also. Arterial gush, for instance, yeah, it's arterial cut, then you could explain why you find a certain pattern. So, yeah.
So collectively, you're covering just about every area of evidence in this case.
I wouldn't say that, maybe, but
Do you agree with me that certifications and degrees can be important in the forensic field?
they can be.
Okay. And there are many requirements to attain these degrees, right?
Yes,
And even more requirements to obtain certifications for board certified type titles.
mm-hmm. Yes,
Okay. And you have to demonstrate a level of knowledge and skill, right?
yes,
And people independently evaluate you so that they can ensure that you meet certain standards within the scientific community before you get a title like a board certified anthropologist or pathologist, right?
yeah.
Neither you or your wife is a board certified forensic anthropologist.
Objection, it's irrelevant with respect to his wife. She's not testifying right now.
He's profiting from his company at which she works.
And my understanding is she's testifying next, so I guess it's okay. Or soon.
So she's better to testify about her
I understand
certifications
that,
and
but he can-
qualifications.
I understand that. He can also testify about it, and you can ask her.
Is anyone at your company a board certified forensic anthropologist?
No,
Is anyone at your company a board certified forensic pathologist?
no,
Are you yourself board certified in any forensic disciplines?
no.
And you reviewed the reports by Dr. Diane Branson in this case?
Yes, I read all the reports.
And she said it was not responsible to opine on cause of death or manner of death from an anthropological standpoint, right?
That's possible. I don't remember what she also had and who wrote what and what kind of report.
Did you review reports by a Dr. Kurtzman?
I did, but I
And
don't remember what he exactly said.
Do you recall if he said that opining on cause of death would be appropriate or not in this case?
I don't remember.
Okay. But you and your company are willing
This is becoming the prosecutor testifying. If he's going to ask this and set up a refreshed recollection, that's fine. But what this is something else.
Why can't he ask leading questions? This is your witness, which is kind of, I don't see that being a problem.
Because the examiner is not to testify. If there's something to back it up, then he needs to have the witness, allow the witness an opportunity to view it.
I don't see anything wrong with this line of questioning.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
On all these topics that we've talked about, everything from pattern analysis to cause of death, manner of death, your company is willing to opine on all of those issues.
Yeah, it's possible.
Okay. Let's talk about your work in this case. You didn't examine all the items of evidence in this case, right?
No.
Just some of them?
Yes.
Have you ever been to the defendant's residence or inside the defendant's residence?
No.
Now, in other cases, you've tried to collect trace evidence, right?
Yes.
And you've also done cases where you've advised people where they could look for it and do additional testing.
Yes.
And in this case, you were given full access to the evidence in the case, right?
No, not full access. Normally what we do is we would like to have pieces of evidence like clothing, to our lab and that we can investigate it there.
To your lab?
Yeah.
You were invited into property and evidence, and you were allowed to look at anything you wanted.
Yes.
And you were given full privacy to do that, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you didn't recommend any DNA or fingerprints or new evidence in the case be tested by us, right?
I don't remember. It's not in the report, but normally there's a list of evidence which could, or investigations we can still do. But probably we did this before. I'm not sure that the report was written pretty late, I think. I don't know.
Okay. So you don't know if that's in your report or not?
No, there's no list.
It's not in your report. You agree with me?
No,
Okay.
I agree with you.
Thank you. And so you, in this case, you mentioned what you were allowed to do or not allowed to do. You remember that?
Yes.
But you didn't make any formal request that the prosecution do an additional test on any of these items of evidence?
No, I don't remember that.
Okay. And you also didn't find any additional evidence yourself in examining these items, such as a fingerprint or DNA on the banana peel?
No, but that was also mainly because we were only allowed to review it, so we could not do the testing, which we would have done if we had the evidence in our hands and could do that.
But you didn't ask us to do that.
I didn't ask to do that. No.
You didn't even.
I'm pretty sure.
You didn't even.
Your Honor, this is burden shifting, telling the government how to prove their case or what evidence should be further analyzed is not the job of the defense. This line of questioning is
Well,
unfair and inappropriate.
it is appropriate because of your line of questioning, trying to show that you provided information that the prosecution should have done some more testing. So this is appropriate. That's number one. Number two, you two are talking over each other. And you're hard enough to understand, Mr. Eichenblum, so please wait for the question and answer to be done before you start.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Eichenblum, you're aware that defense counsel in this case was able to ask for items to be tested, such as a beer can, which we did for them. You aware of that?
No, I'm not aware that is possible. We were involved first in the case a long time ago. And what we normally do then, but it could also be a phone call or when we meet up to say, okay, these are the types of investigations we can perform for you. But yeah, that's not in the report. So,
not in the report.
No, I don't know. So I don't know what we all discussed during the first meetings.
Okay. And what's also not in the report is anything about fingerprinting or doing DNA on a banana peel, right?
No.
Not in the report. Okay, thank you. So basically your case review is you looked at the pictures in the case and you talked about that, all of them. Am I right? Was it
Yes.
all of them?
All the pictures which were provided to me, yes.
Okay. What was provided to you would have come from defense counsel, what we put into discovery to them, right?
Yes.
You never made an additional request of our office for any particular information. You worked off what they gave you.
Yeah, we work for the defense and they give us the information we ask.
Okay. And so you read CBI reports as well?
Yes.
Your first report was issued on February 11th of 2020, correct?
That's correct.
And did you review the materials that were provided to you carefully before you issued your opinion in the case?
Yeah, there was a lot of information, of course, and it's very difficult to cover everything which is in there. But I reviewed, yes, of course, I reviewed all of it.
Your report's your expert opinion, right?
Sorry?
I'm sorry, I stepped away. Your report is your expert opinion, correct?
Yes.
And in your expert opinion, you rely upon those materials and you review them carefully before you issue an expert opinion, right?
Yes.
Now, how long was it until Dylan's remains were found after he went missing?
Yeah, short of 2 years, I understood.
And you testified a couple of times you believe it to be 2 years that his remains, so they were recovered?
Yeah, about, but it was shorter, I understood, 1.5 years. Or...
What day did Dylan go missing?
I wouldn't know out of my head.
Okay. What day was the search warrant executed?
A couple of weeks later, I understood, I think.
2 weeks later, you believe?
That's possible.
So 7+ years later, you reviewed the parts of the case that the defense provided to you, right?
Yes.
Did you know there were 30,000 pages of discovery and nearly 500 discs in this case?
No, I didn't know. I know there was a lot to review.
Is it fair to say you only reviewed a fraction of that?
Well, we review, and of course, this review it doesn't mean that you extensively investigate everything, because that would take months and years. So I looked at every picture, and then you very quickly scan through that and say, okay, is there something which could be relevant to the case? But of course, no, I cannot review in the time which was given to us, and we went greatly over the time already. Everything in detail, and especially if you talk about 500 discs, no, I didn't see that.
So in your quick scan where you didn't look at all the details, your understanding is Dylan was out in the woods for 2 years before his remains were recovered, and it was 2 weeks before the search warrant was executed.
Objection. He was giving approximations that were pretty good for this pop quiz. So I'm going to object to the form of the question and testifying from the podium.
Well, again, you're overruled. You can redirect on it. I think the jury understands the situation this witness is in and can draw their own conclusions from it, from questions from both sides. So go ahead, Mr. Just go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Let's talk a little bit more about the pretty good information you had going into these expert opinions. When was the fire?
Sorry?
When was the fire?
The fire?
Yes, when was the fire? When was the fire at 2343 County Road 500 in Bayfield?
I don't know about fire.
When was the certificate of occupancy at 2343 County Road 500 in Bayfield?
I would not know that.
When were the floors replaced?
Never read something about floors replacement.
When was the furniture replaced?
Never heard of that.
How many visits did Dylan actually have to that house after the fire and the new floors and the certificate of occupancy?
I would not know.
So you have an opinion as to whether his blood may be in the living room naturally, inadvertently, and you don't know how many days he's even been in that house with those floors and couches?
It would be relevant information, I think.
I think so too.
But yeah, there's a fact that there's one stain on the sheet.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
We'll get to that.
It stays the same, but it's a pretty small stain.
You weren't out on the crime scene during the processing, were you?
No.
You didn't see the actual luminol reaction take place, right?
No.
You'd agree with me when luminol reacts that it gets bright in some areas and then it fades out relatively quickly, right?
Yeah, as I said, the false positives fade out quicker than the positive blood because it's tepid. And yes, I agree.
Okay. So you don't know what at the stage of that reaction these photographs were taken, but you're working off photographs that are essentially a snapshot in time, right?
Not clearly. It depends on how the pictures were taken. But as I said, in order to get the luminescence, you have to keep your lens open. And that's during the luminescence. So you keep it open from the beginning. So before you make it all dark, before you apply the luminol, you put the camera in place. The moment the luminol is applied, you put your lens open and you leave it like that for depending at least several seconds most of the time to capture the luminescence.
So you'd agree with me it's a snapshot in the time of the process as the luminol fades?
Well, snapshot would indicate like what you do with a normal camera, but here we talk about seconds. So, and most of the time you cover the fading out of the luminol also. But yes, in the picture you only see the accumulation of luminol, of the luminescence. Okay. You cannot, in that sense, you could call it a snapshot. You have to videotape it in order to see it going up and down again.
You'd agree with me that to do blood pattern analysis reliably, you need a big amount of blood and blood stains to come to a pattern, right?
No, not per se a big amount. A small spatter can give you information, or 10 small spatters with very low volume can give you a lot of information about an impact, for instance.
Well,
So this has to be a large volume.
so let's break this down a little bit, because I think what you've testified to, in fairness, is that you can't make any definitive conclusions from the pictures that you have in this case. Is that a fair characterization of your direct examination?
So with luminol, yeah, you have to be careful. And then what I was looking for is that that's in pattern analysis. You really like to see pictures of, well, red, blood, and then the size and shape of it. And that's not present. So yeah, you have to be very careful here with interpretation.
Right. And as you testified to in the Timothy Kennedy trial in April 29th of 2014, you need a big amount of blood stains to come to an actual pattern, correct?
Well, I'm not sure if I said that like that.
Okay. Would you agree that you have to be careful not to overdo it?
Overinterpretation is an issue with Dustin pattern analysis, yes.
And you don't know from one blood stain if it's a pattern. You'd agree with all of that, right?
No, one blood stain. A blood stain, as I said, is the top, so then it means that all kinds of mechanisms can make a stain. If you have one transfer of a hand, then of course one stain can be, you can do an interpretation on. So you can make an interpretation on a stain if it has clear definitions.
You always have to be careful in determining. You don't want to overdo it and overly interpret. But we saw a very small blood stain. Those words sound familiar as your words from the Kennedy transcript.
Objection, this is improper impeachment, I guess, but I'd like to look at that if council is going to go any further with it, and there's a proper way to set this up under 613 and 1610-201 that has not been established.
Well, he talked about testifying in the Kennedy case. He's representing, this is a transcript from his testimony. I don't see anything wrong with this procedure.
There's got to be the date. He's got to point the person's attention to it.
Already did, Judge.
There's more crediting necessary.
I don't think he has to point the date, point out the date, maybe, and he did, I believe, point out the date anyway, in terms of what the date of the trial was, but it's a specific, I mean, he couldn't have testified multiple times, I wouldn't think, in the trial. I think it's appropriate, so he either remembers it or he doesn't. So,
Permission to look at the transcript the prosecutor is referencing.
you care?
No, I have a copy of the pertinent pages, and I think I have the whole thing in my binder electronically somewhere. I can give counsel the pertinent pages.
Go ahead.
And so, sir, I'm not trying to be difficult here, but you'd agree with me on the general concept and the words you used in the Kennedy case, that you have to be careful not to overdo it with pattern analysis when you just have a little bit of blood. Isn't that fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. And especially with luminol, right?
Yeah, in interpretation of luminol, you have to take a step back and see what you really see there. And if there's nothing to see with the naked eye, you should not do an interpretation about the type of blood stain pattern.
Thank you. Okay. So, and also that would be consistent with what you listened to on the agent from CBI saying that with the limited amount of information here, because the blood wasn't visible to the naked eye, that it wouldn't be responsible to give too many opinions on pattern analysis. You'd agree with that too, right?
Yeah, so the pattern is very difficult. So as said with luminol, yeah, we don't call it the pattern, but that cleaning activity that you could make a support for a certain hypothesis of cleaning. But after that, yeah, you have to be extremely careful, and most of the time you don't see enough definition that you can come up with a pattern. We have some experience where you could still see a transfer of a hand with luminol. That's possible. And a shoe imprint on the floor, sometimes with luminol also. I wouldn't recommend it, but in carpet, sometimes you get nice results. So I wouldn't exclude it, but yeah, you have to be very careful. I completely agree with that. And I've always said that.
Thank you. And that's why your results here in looking at the photographs are for the most part, just inconclusive.
Yeah, very careful, I think.
And you'd agree that you have to be careful in trying to determine the amount of blood from luminol photos. You'd agree with that as well?
Yes.
And there are a few reasons for that, right?
Yes.
One reason is that luminol pattern is often after cleanup activity, and that's why it's not visible, right?
Yeah, so as the examples you could see, if there's nothing visible, then there's no pattern. Then if something comes visible with the luminol, and then you have to be careful, okay, what do I see really here? If there's really clear definition, which very often there's not, maybe you could say something, but if there's not, yeah, then you don't know the blood stain pattern, and you should not comment about the blood stain pattern.
And if because there's none visible to the naked eye and it's been cleaned up, there could be less at the time that you're seeing the luminol.
Yeah, that's typically with cleaning up. There, of course, the volume of blood before cleaning was bigger than the volume after the cleaning up.
And then additionally, if water is applied to it, it can change the pattern as well.
Yes.
Let's talk about cleanup in general. So blood typically makes a stain, right? Because it's red.
Yeah,
Okay.
depending on the surface, of course, like the black clothing is very difficult, and some types of carpet and the couches here were not, this brown, dark brown is always difficult to see blood, even if it's there, if it's wiped out, yeah, it's possible you don't see it with a naked eye, so.
Right, but we had multiple surfaces here, right? We had a couch,
Yeah.
we had a love seat, we had a coffee table that was wood color, and then we had a floor that was just approximately the lighter color like this table, right?
Yes.
So if I were to bleed, if I were to cut my hand by accident right here, and I were to deposit blood on this table, you'd see blood on that table, right?
On this table, yeah, I would expect that. Yeah.
And then you'd continue to see blood on that table until something happened to remove that blood because it has a dark stain to it, right?
Yeah, on that color, yes.
The most obvious reason being that it's wiped away or cleaned up, right?
Yeah, so of course, with this flat surfaces, if we talk about a drop of blood, what you very often see is drying, and it's very dry here, so it dries very quickly, and then it flakes off. And luminol can still pick up the blood which remains, which you don't see. But yeah, that's possible.
And additionally, if it were to dry, right, and someone were to wipe it away, the same way that you described the flaking, it could retain like a pattern, or I don't want to call it a pattern, but it could retain a shape when it's hit with the luminol, right?
Yes, it's possible.
Okay. And so blood doesn't just go away on its own, though. You'd agree with me, right?
No, if it's deposited on the surface there, yeah, there's some kind of mechanism that has to remove it. Over time, it becomes darker, blacker. And what could happen is, I said, the flaking, especially in these dry climates. Yeah, but then, yeah, still you need some type of wind in the house or something that moves away. Otherwise, it will stick on the surface.
Right. So put simply, if there's no cleaning, then we'd see blood with the naked eye in this case.
Well, there's of course other mechanisms which could cause blood. If you have it on the floor and just somebody walks on top of it, yeah, then you also remove the stain. So there's different kinds of mechanisms which could cause it. The dogs are known to ruin crime scenes. So yeah, there's different ways. Cleaning is one of them. Yes.
So if you put a rug on top of it, you'd expect there to be blood on the rug, right?
If it's still fluid, then you get this stamp effect. Yeah, then you would expect blood on the rug.
You'd agree with me with the general statement that luminol is especially helpful in cases where a suspect has cleaned up blood, right?
Yeah.
And you noted that, I think, 3 times in your report. On page 2, you said it's especially helpful in situations of cleaning activity. On page 14, you said due to the high sensitivity of luminol, it's very suitable to show remnants of blood which are no longer visible to the naked eye, for example, by cleaning, right?
Objection asked and answered. The question was asked. There's no need to ask it 3 different ways, citing this way.
I tend to agree with that, Mr. Johnson. That's
Mr. Honor. And you'd agree with me that using a test like phenolphthalein can then rule out the false positives for luminol, right?
Yes, it's a proper procedure to do a more reliable presumptive test. But also the phenolphthalein has some false positives.
And there was a portion of your report which was like an informative portion, right, that explained some of these general concepts?
Yes.
And you explained that false positive reactions from luminol can be identified by using a specific blood test, like a tetra-based test, right?
Yes.
And you also said that only after a positive test like phenolphthalein, the conclusion about the possible presence of blood can be drawn, right?
Yes.
And you reviewed the CBI reports in this case, right?
Yes.
And you know that phenolphthalein was used in all the samples that were collected by CBI in this case.
Yes.
And you also know that an ABA brand Hemotrace immunoassay card was used on those samples that were collected as well, right?
Of some of them, yes. I'm not sure I could find out which one was elected, all of them. An immunoassay is more reliable than a standard presumptive test. So if it's positive with an immunoassay, then yeah, you can be more sure that there at least was blood present.
You reviewed Agent Clayton's report, right?
Yes, I remember.
And you reviewed in that report that he tested various areas of phenotyping where it indicated the ABA card brand trace immunoassay cards in the blood. Several areas did reveal positive tests, with photographically documented that positive areas were collected by Agent Clayton and logged into evidence.
I remember that, yes.
That sounds right.
Yes.
So you'd agree with me that the areas of blood that we're discussing in this case were tested not just with luminol, but 3 ways on scene.
So luminol, the phenolphthalein, and then the hemotrace.
Right.
Yeah. Seems like that.
And if that is done, then we know that it's not a false positive in all but the situation where it's either a primate's blood or a ferret's blood. Would you agree with me on that?
Yeah, for the hemotrace, after the hemotrace. That's
right.
A human specific. There's normally the blood test, like the presumptive test database, would also react with pig blood or horse blood. It just reacts with blood, so animal blood would be possible. Our immunoassays are more specific and can test for human blood alone. Yeah. I agree with that.
Would you feel comfortable agreeing that if those 3 tests are done in the field and they're all positive, that you have a high comfort level as an expert that that's in fact blood?
Yeah, the blood is present in the sample. That's sure. Of course, you have to combine the DNA results as well, and then if you get a mixture of DNA, it becomes more complicated.
Sure, and that's a whole different area to talk about, right? But as we're talking about these 5 samples that are tested 3 ways on scene, you'd agree that's a good process to use to affirm that this is in fact blood?
Yes, that's absolutely good procedure.
And as you're applying these tests, you can dilute those samples, right? For example, the luminol.
So yeah, luminol, but you can see it on the picture already, will dilute the sample. So yeah, if there was blood there, small amount, then luminol will dilute it a little bit. And depending on how much you apply, with the hand spray it's more, then yeah, you can dilute it a couple of times.
Okay.
The hemotrace and phenolphthalein, no dilution should take place normally if you apply that. The hemotrace, I'm not sure how you do the test with the phenolphthalein. I think you cut a piece of the swab. We always touch the object itself, but okay, you could lose a little bit of material there. You cut a piece of the swab, so you lose a little bit of material on the swab. If there was blood on the swab, or you can assume that if all 3 tests were positive, you lose some of that material.
Okay. And sir, you started to talk about how you have to then factor in whether DNA is recovered, whether there are mixtures, things like that, right?
Yes.
And in this case, you reviewed all the CBI reports?
Yes.
So you'd agree with me that of the 5 samples collected on scene that tested positive for blood, Dylan Redwine's the only person that can't be excluded from any of those 5 samples, right?
Yes.
I want to talk to you just about a few opinions in your report. In your, you had opined that blood was probably visible here, but I think your testimony cleared that fact up today, right?
Well, as I said before, yeah, I always look, and that of course is more difficult on pictures, especially if you don't see them. But as I explained, like with the table, you would expect to see blood. If you don't see it, then some way this blood was cleaned or stepped away. But like the couch, I know from experience in the darker wood that it's very difficult to sometimes see blood, even if it's still there, and then you only find it in luminol, unfortunately, and then you hope that after that you can still make a picture of the shape, the size of the blood stain. But in this case, yeah, I didn't find any good pictures of this size and shape of the blood stains, which were made visible with luminol.
Right. So all this is to say you agree that this is an appropriate situation to use luminol?
Yes.
Okay. And then additionally, you talked a little bit about different types of sprayers, and you said a high pressure sprayer at some point, paint sprayer?
Yeah, paint sprayer, professional paint sprayer.
But you know that CBI still uses, even to this day, the same spray bottle with the fine mist because it's nice and gentle when they process?
Yeah, obviously they do that, yeah.
So you talked a little bit about your opinion of whether there was evidence to support a violent occurrence in the living room. You remember all that?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that you can't rule that in or rule that out based on the evidence you saw in this case?
No, you cannot. Yeah, there's very little blood, so you cannot. There could be all kinds of violence, and then some of the violence you don't have much blood. Shooting incidents, if people wear clothing, very often give very little blood. The force, therefore, actually, of course, stabbings and especially beating on the head, very often give a lot of blood.
But
So,
let's break this down a little bit.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of head injuries. Would you agree with me on that?
in common. In this case, or in all?
No, just generally
Oh,
speaking.
generally, yes. Yes.
There are different types of head injuries.
Yes.
Some of them are fractured skulls.
Yes.
Some of them, the skin doesn't even break.
Yes, that's possible.
And some of them, there are subdural hematomas that can be fatal, and there's not even an injury on the exterior.
Yes, that's possible.
It's a brain injury.
Yeah.
So there's also other ways that people can be killed with very little blood, such as strangulations, things like that.
Yes, we see that quite often as well.
But you're not a doctor, and would you agree with me you don't have an opinion as to exactly what occurred on that living room based on a few luminol photographs?
I'm not a doctor, no. No, and then of course, the small amount of blood does not leave much room for interpretation of what really happened there.
Okay. And we saw some photographs that you used as demonstratives, and they had large amounts of luminol, right?
Yeah.
You talked about some of those. One of them, the person was tortured and dragged through the house after they were tortured. Is that the one with the chair?
Yeah.
That's a particularly bloody and violent case. Would you agree?
Yeah. The person died and had a lot of injuries.
And you talked about a decapitation, one of them inside the residence that had that blood. Is that right?
Yes.
But if somebody, and counsel asked you a few questions about dismemberment, right?
Mm-hmm.
This dismemberment occurs long after the heart has stopped beating because the body's dead. You're not going to have that type of bleeding, are you?
Yeah, it depends, of course. Of course, what is important is if the heart's still beating, then you get if you get an artery or just a vein, people start bleeding as like you do if you cut yourself. Somebody's dead, that doesn't happen anymore. You don't have circulation. But of course, as long as the body didn't completely decompose and the blood is still fluid in the body, which stays for several days at least, depending on all kinds of circumstances. So then you still, if you're cutting a body up, you still will have this blood coming out of there. But of course, it's not as active if I cut an artery in the head or in the throat. So now you're more getting a different type of pattern flowing of blood out of the body. You still use a chainsaw or something like that on the body, then you will still create a lot of
Let's take a step back. I don't think we need to talk about chainsaws.
Okay.
But what I want to ask you about is to comment on whether the amount of blood in the living room has anything to do with a dismemberment assumes the fact that the dismemberment would have occurred in the living room with that same clothing, right? It assumes that fact.
Yes, yeah. If you can sometimes test an hypothesis and say, okay, well, what would you expect on certain? The things are reproducible and predictable, so you could, in some circumstances, test an hypothesis what you would expect to find if I beat somebody 10 times on the head, I would expect a spatter. So if it's not there, then you say, well, there's no support for the hypothesis. But all the possibilities that it just didn't take place there.
Right.
So you have to be careful.
Right. Let's just use one example. Could have been a single blow to the head that was fatal, that didn't cause a whole lot of bleeding, or it did and it was cleaned up. And that body could have been moved and it could have been altered at a later date out in the woods somewhere. That would be a very different hypothesis.
Yes. And that, of course, under those conditions, you wouldn't expect blood in the living room.
Now, let's talk about the banana peel a little bit. There was a lot of back and forth about what it meant or didn't mean. In terms of the banana peel, you didn't try to fingerprint it or anything like that?
No, we were not allowed to take samples or to touch it, actually. So we just reviewed it and said, okay, it's kind of interesting. I'm not sure how it's related to the case.
In your opinion, and you didn't convey to the prosecution or anyone that idea up until now, basically, right? Is that fair?
Objection, it's in the report.
Fingerprinting's not in the report, Judge.
You know what? I'm going to sustain the objection.
I'll move on. So you had a few observations about it, right? That it likely didn't hold on for 7 months, right? Was one of your observations in the interview we did on page 2?
No, just said here, it was special to observe because we see this often. When I looked at the picture, I thought, well, it's just something which could have come on the crime scene later or was on the crime scene and got tangled up with it. But when we tested it, it was still sticky. And that's the thing, and as I tried to explain as well, that even after, well, don't mention 2 years, but the time 1.5 years or between that the victim was found, it's not normal that sticky side still would stick because all the rain and all the weather conditions, but it did. So it's a given that it was there. And what you want to make more of that? It's a finding.
Why is it a given that it was on there?
Well, it's still on there.
Yeah.
So and then then the question, of course, is okay. When was it put on there?
Well, and you reviewed the evidence, and in conjunction with reviewing the evidence, you reviewed the evidence logs too, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you know that there was searches going on for days out there?
Yes.
And you know that searchers were eating food out in the field, right?
Probably. I don't remember that it was described.
Well, do you remember that there was a banana peel packaged with the clothing scraps?
Yeah, the banana peel, I've seen that, yeah.
Okay. It's a heck of a coincidence, isn't it?
So what's the question?
The question is, you presupposed that it held on there for 7 months, but in fact, that scrap of clothing was collected with multiple items, including a banana peel.
Yeah, but still, at some point, it has to be put on the clothing, or it had to become on the clothing. And of course, if you would, if it was stuck on the banana peel, then you would expect it to stuck on there. Why would it transfer to the clothing? So it looked like that it was put there on purpose. Maybe he did it himself. I don't know why it was there, but yeah, it was there and it was still sticking. That's actually mainly the main point I wanted to make, I think.
Well, okay, but in June 3rd of 2021, you did an interview with myself and Investigator Heidel was there, right?
Yes.
In that interview, you said, regarding the banana peel and banana sticker that was mentioned in the report, you were not sure the significance in the case and described it as just an observation, right?
Yes.
And you questioned whether the adhesive would hold the sticker to the shirt would still be viable after it had been out in that environment until it was recovered, right?
Asked and answered.
He's talking about the report, so I think it's okay.
Do you agree with that statement?
Yes, I probably, as I said here, it was the expectation that after 2 years you wouldn't expect anything to stick anymore, but it did. So the expectation can be wrong sometimes, and that's what in this case is, because it stuck, and it seems that it was there
or you could
quite a long time.
Or you could be right that it wasn't stuck on there for 7 months, based on some of the information we just talked about. Let's talk about, counsel asked you about some of the items of evidence you looked at, right?
Yes.
He didn't ask you about the earbuds, but when you looked at those, you said the cable seemed cut, right?
That's correct.
That would involve human involvement, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. If you talk about cutting, of course, then it's like with a knife or something. But of course, there's also a lot of rodent activity here, and teeth and the claws can be very sharp. So you can cut something with a sharp claw as well. So it's just sharp. It seems to be, and that's also not my field of expertise, but it seems to be cut with something sharp.
You didn't talk about animal claws in the report, though, right? You just said cut.
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned in your report, one of your expert opinions is that a small amount of blood samples, as in 2.1 on the love seat, gives indication on single source DNA, which supports the hypothesis of blood loss by Dylan. You recall that?
Yes.
Are you aware that the defendant gave a statement to the FBI in this case?
I have seen statements of the defendant, but I'm not sure where you're referring to it.
Is your hypothesis of the,
That's beyond the scope. So I'm going to move to strike and object to any further questions along this line. We asked these experts to look at the laboratory information and other crime scene investigations. So interviews were beyond the purview of direct examination and what he was requesting.
I'll ask a different question, Your Honor.
All right.
So when you say the hypothesis of blood loss by Dylan, is that based on a statement by the defendant of the FBI, the hypothesis that you're commenting on as expert opinion?
That's the same.
So Judge, he's issued an expert opinion in contemplating a hypothesis, and I just want to ask him because counsel asked quite a bit about the small blood samples and single source, et cetera.
Okay, I'm going to overrule the objection.
So when you say the hypothesis, you mean the defendant's hypothesis. Am I accurate about that?
No.
Section, yeah. He wouldn't know that Mr. Redwine's hypothesis.
Well, he just said no, so that's not your hypothesis. So
No.
What is the hypothesis? When you say, let me just ask you directly then. When you say a small amount of blood samples as 2.1 gives indication on a single source of DNA, which supports hypothesis of blood loss by Dylan, is that hypothesis that there was never any injury to Dylan? Is that hypothesis that there was a bloody lip sore? Or is that hypothesis that a Nerf football caused a bleeding injury that accounts for all this blood? Which hypothesis is that?
No, the hypothesis is you're talking about activity level hypothesis. First, when you do the investigation, you go to the source level. Is it blood? Well, that was proven by very accurately by CBI and the FBI, I think. And then you go, okay, which is source? That's the DNA part. And then I think that's the point I want to make there is that there's support that Dylan donated his blood to the sample. So we're in DNA level now. First we prepare blood, then we determine, okay, who is it from? This is blood of Dylan. So there's strong support that Dylan donated, strong support for the hypothesis that Dylan donated blood on this chair. So the hypothesis is you wanted to know, okay, the source of blood and well, is it blood? So and then you come up to the hypothesis, not the hypothesis how it was distributed, but the hypothesis that it is blood of Dylan. It's very important at the source level. It does not test how it did get there.
So you'd agree with me, sir? I just want to ask you one more line of questioning. So we talked a little bit about mixtures in the room, right?
Yes.
And we just talked about single source. So let me put up 160. Now, when you see this type of blood or reaction from luminol, you said in the past that if it was on a rug, that you can almost always find it, right?
So yeah, rugs are extremely difficult to clean.
And you're aware in this case, the rug didn't have any blood on it when luminol was applied to it, right?
Yeah, the rug was tested negative. I understood.
So you'd agree with me that someone put a rug over that blood? You'd agree with me because there's no blood on the rug, that someone put a rug over that portion of blood.
Yeah, so if the blood is dry and you put a rug on top of that, then of course the dry blood can cause some luminescence, but if it's concentrated, that's difficult sometimes to see. But yeah, the fluid blood is what will react with luminol the best, if it was fluid and then dried. So yeah, it's possible that you put a rug on top of dry blood because you put it there much later, and that you don't find a positive reaction. Yeah, that's possible.
So when we talk about DNA mixtures, you'd agree with me that with no other information, you can't tell which person contributed blood to the mixture and which person could have contributed something else to the mixture, right?
Yes, if you don't have other information, that's the problem with the mixtures. You always want to get more context, and of course, DNA scientists very often don't have that. There's one thing with blood stains, if you have a real major donor and a minor, blood is a very good source of DNA.
So I want to stop you only because you've been limited to sort of crime scene, right? But I do want to ask you, because you made an important point, right? Context is important.
Yes.
And so if you knew, let's hypothetically say you knew that was a mixture of two people, and one of those people could definitively tell you that they hadn't bled in that location, that context information would tell you that blood came from the other person, right?
Objection, that's a mischaracterization of
The hypothetical
testimony. Well,
Right.
the hypo, yeah.
It's been a long time, and I'm sorry, I don't remember where some people said they did or did not bleed.
I remember, Judge.
I'm sure you do.
As do I.
It was stated by Corey Redwine that he did not bleed there, but I was just going to do a hypothetical to point out the context and how conclusions can be drawn.
He did testify that he did bleed at the house.
Well, the jury can remember whichever one he did testify to in their collective memory, and you can ask the hypothetical with that understanding.
Thank you, Your Honor. So if you had a mixture of two, let's just assume hypothetically, and you were able to determine that one of those people had not bled there, then with that type of context information, you could make a better conclusion as to whose blood it was.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you, sir.
You have 6 minutes, or else I'll have to come back, so whatever you want to do.
I'm going to give it a shot, Your Honor.
Okay.
Please keep up People's Exhibit 167. This, to me, looks like it's in front of the love seat. And there was swab taken there that did not indicate the presence of blood. Is that consistent with information that you have reviewed? Yes. Yeah. Would it help to take a look at this picture, and you can compare the picture that says that there is a DNA profile from this spot that is not blood, that is Dylan and Corey? Would it help to take a look at a picture so you can?
Yes, that's what I remember of that picture.
Thank you. What counts as the person? Yes. Just 340. Let me show you the real one.
Based on the way the 4 was fluorescing there, is it your impression, based on your expertise, that that was probably blood, or at least iron oxidizing and luminescent?
Now, with luminol, if it's fluorescence, at least you have an indication that there is some type of metal holding paint or some other issue type of material there. So there's fluorescence, and then you investigate it with the presumptive tests. And if the presumptive tests are positive, then there's support for the hypothesis that it is blood.
There are 3 things there: blood, DNA of Corey, and DNA of Dylan. Can you say who bled there?
No, not based on the information I've got.
Commissioner approach.
Yes.
I'm going to object to beyond the scope and irrelevant.
I don't know what it is, so I don't know that I can respond. Mr. Moran?
The certifications for his laboratory, he was questioned about whether he was certified, board certified, but he was also questioned about whether his certifications were accurate, up to date, and They clearly are based on these
He
exhibits.
wasn't asked if his lab was certified. He was asked if he had certification in what he was testifying about, and so I find it to be irrelevant.
These are certificates of accreditation that,
That's
For
inappropriate.
his lab,
Which
is what you stated. So,
which
so
is part of the work he does.
right, but that's not what he was asked. That's not what he did, and so I'm sustaining the objection.
Mr. Eichenboom, based on what you have reviewed, do you have any reason to believe that Colorado Bureau of Investigation crime investigator Joe Clayton reviewed all 30,000 pages of discovery?
I don't think so.
In any of his reports, he mentioned that he had looked at all 500 pages of, or all 500 discs in this case to reach his conclusions?
Objection.
That's unfair. That's unfair based upon the situation that both of these witnesses were in. And what was testified to by both witnesses, so you cannot ask that.
Okay, understood. There were questions to you about a certificate of occupancy that was issued sometime in 2010 or 2011. How many trips of Dylan Redwine to that house would have been necessary for the blood and the amount found here, specifically that blood on the love seat that is Dylan? Would he have had to visit many times or once?
Just one incident, of course, can cause this. If you get a bleeding injury to your hand or your face, wipe your nose and wipe it there. Yeah, it's not that much. So yeah, one incident is enough.
We're looking at the FBI evidence response team casebook, refresh your recollection as to what date it was that they did their search.
Yeah, about the crime
Search that you were asked about that happened on November 29th, 2012. You thought it was a week or 2 weeks later. Would you agree that November 29th, 2012 sounds all right?
Yeah, I think so.
I can
I'm not
show you
sure,
the
of course.
report if that would help refresh your recollection about the report you read a while ago.
Yeah.
There were some questions to you about a Timothy Kennedy case that happened in 1995. Do you remember testifying in that case?
Yes.
And that was a case about high velocity impact spatter and possible gunshot evidence.
Yes, it was a double homicide of a man and a girl, and yeah, there was a lot of blood there.
So very different than what we're talking about in this one.
Yes.
There were questions to you about whether you've ever worked for law enforcement, and it ultimately was resolved that you've never had a W-2 or paycheck from law enforcement. But have you consulted with law enforcement?
Yes.
Have you studied with law enforcement?
Yes.
Have you taught law enforcement?
Yes.
Have you helped law enforcement solve cases?
Yes.
When you worked as a crime scene investigator and analyst in the Netherlands, did the Netherlands have an interest similar to how we do in the United States of America in solving crimes?
Objection beyond the scope. And it's also been covered already.
This part, I think, this last part, I'm going to agree with. I mean, he's already testified that that's what he did for the courts in solving crimes, so I think it's been covered. Do you have any more? Because we're at our hard stop.
I'm going to have to bring him back for a few minutes.
All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have to come back. I'm sorry. Hang on just a second. Please don't discuss this case amongst yourselves or with anyone else during the course of the trial. Don't initiate, post, or respond anything about social media Just keep an open mind. Don't talk to anybody about the case, and don't gather any information on your own. We will start up again at 12:30. I know that's longer than normal, but excuse me, that's shorter than normal. How about 1:30? Make sure that our juror can do what she needs to do and still get something to eat. All right. Everybody agree?